The dust hung thick in the afternoon air, coating everything in Dry Creek with a fine layer of grit. The town square, if one could call the patch of trampled earth between the general store and the saloon a square, was more crowded than usual. Men in worn leather chaps and sweat-stained hats gathered in clusters, their voices rising and falling like waves of heat off the parched ground. Women in calico dresses stood at the edges, some with children clutching at their skirts, all drawn by the same grim spectacle. At the center of it all stood Sheriff McKenna, his badge catching the harsh sunlight. Beside him, chained like an animal, was a man whose very presence seemed to command both fear and fascination from the crowd. Tall and broad-shouldered, with skin bronzed by sun and heritage, he stood with a dignity that no amount of iron could diminish. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and though his wrists were bound with rusted shackles that had carved raw grooves into his flesh, he held his head high. His face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut, yet his remaining eye surveyed the crowd with unsettling calm. "Step right up, folks," the sheriff called out, his voice carrying the authority of law and the showmanship of a carnival barker. "Got ourselves a genuine wild one here. Caught him stealing horses from the Morrison Ranch. Judge says he's to be sold to cover the damages." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. "Savage," someone spat. "Beast," another added. The words flew like stones, but the man in chains never flinched. His dark eyes swept over the crowd with a calm that seemed to unsettle them more than any show of rage would have. $50 to start," McKenna announced. "Who'll give me 50 for this strong back? Put him to work in the mines or breaking horses. Lord knows these savages are good with animals." Men shuffled a few, considering the offer, weighing the price against the work they could extract. From the back of the crowd, a voice rose clear and sharp as a rifle crack. "Don't hurt him." Heads turned as one. Through the parting crowd came a woman in a faded brown dress that had seen too many washings. Clara Whitford's auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her green eyes blazed with a fire that made strong men step aside. She was known in Dry Creek as the widow Whitford who lived alone on a failing ranch at the edge of town, too proud to remarry and too stubborn to sell. "I'll buy him," she declared, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Sheriff McKenna's mustache twitched with barely concealed amusement. "Now, Mrs. Whitford, this ain't no church charity case. This here's a dangerous—" "I said I'll buy him." Clara reached into her worn leather purse and pulled out a small cloth bundle. The coins inside clinked softly as she held it up. "Here's $70. Everything I have." The crowd erupted. "Clara, have you lost your mind, Mrs. Patterson?" The banker's wife gasped. "You can't bring that creature onto your property. He's a thief," someone else shouted. "A savage!" Clara's jaw set like granite. "Call him savage all you want," she said, her eyes never leaving the chained man's face. "I see a man worth saving." For the first time, something flickered in the prisoner's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper that had been buried beneath years of harsh treatment. McKenna looked uncomfortable now, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Mrs. Whitford, I got a responsibility to this town." "You have a responsibility to the law," Clara interrupted. "The judge said he was to be sold. I'm buying, unless you're telling me my money's no good because I'm a woman." That struck a nerve. The sheriff's face reddened, but he couldn't argue with her logic. In a town where law was still finding its footing, even he couldn't openly discriminate against a widow's legal tender. "Fine," he growled, snatching the bundle from her hand. He counted the coins with exaggerated care, clearly hoping to find her short. When the count came up true, His scowl deepened. "Bill of sale will be at my office. You can collect it and him in an hour." Clara nodded curtly. "I'll take him now." "Now, see here. I've paid for him. He's my property now, as you so crudely put it. I'll take him now. Or you can explain to Judge Harrison why you held on to him after the sale was complete." The threat of involving the circuit judge, who was known for his strict adherence to the letter of the law, made McKenna's protest die in his throat. With visible reluctance, he produced a key and unlocked the shackles around the man's ankles, though he left the wrist restraints in place. "The rest come off when I get the bill of sale," Clara said firmly. She turned to the man, and in a voice gentler than any he'd likely heard in months, said, "Come with me." The man studied her for a long moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Then, with a dignity that made the crowd's earlier jeers seem even more shameful, he inclined his head slightly and stepped forward. As Clara led him through the crowd, the townspeople parted like the Red Sea, but their faces showed none of Moses's reverence. Disgust, shock, and moral outrage painted their features in broad strokes. "You'll regret this, Clara," Mrs. Patterson called after them. "Mark my words." Clara didn't turn around. "The only thing I'd regret," she said loud enough for all to hear, "is standing by while you all treat a human being like livestock." Old Samuel Turner, the blacksmith, shook his grizzled head. "That woman's going to get herself killed," he muttered. "Them savages can't be civilized. It's not in their nature." But young Tom Bradley, the doctor's son, watched the pair disappear down the dusty street with thoughtful eyes. "Maybe," he said quietly, "it's our nature that needs civilizing." His father cuffed him sharply on the ear. "Don't let me hear such talk from you again, boy. That kind of thinking will see you run out of town or worse." As Clara and the man walked toward the livery stable, she could feel the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on her shoulders like a yoke. But she'd borne heavier burdens: the loss of her husband, the struggle to keep the ranch afloat, the pitying looks that had followed her for 3 years. All of it had prepared her for this moment. She glanced sideways at the man walking beside her. Despite the chains, he moved with a fluid grace that spoke of strength held in check. His face, now that she could see it clearly, was weathered, but not old, marked by hardship, but not broken by it. "I'm Clara," she said softly, not expecting a response. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and she saw intelligence in those dark eyes, along with a weariness born of hard experience. At the livery stable, the owner, Mr. Dawson, looked up from shoeing a horse, his hammer pausing mid-swing when he saw who accompanied Clara. "Mrs. Whitford," he said cautiously, "what can I do for you?" "I need to rent 2 horses," Clara replied. "One for me and one for my employee." Dawson's eyes widened. "You want me to give that Injun a horse? He's a horse thief." "I want you to rent me 2 horses, Mr. Dawson. What I do with them is my business." Dawson hesitated, looking from Clara to the silent man beside her. Finally, he shrugged. "Your funeral, ma'am, but I'll need a deposit, in case he decides to make off with my property." Clara counted out more coins, painfully aware that her savings were dwindling rapidly. But she held her head high, as Dawson brought out 2 horses, a gentle bay mare for her, and an older sway-backed gelding for her companion. The man looked at the decrepit horse with what might have been a flash of amusement, but he said nothing as he mounted, even with his wrists still bound. As they rode out of town, Clara could feel eyes watching from every window. She straightened her back and fixed her gaze on the road ahead. The man rode slightly behind her, his posture easy despite his constraints, as if he'd been born to the saddle. The road to her ranch wound through rolling hills that in spring would be carpeted with wild flowers. Now, in the late summer drought, they were golden brown, the grass crisp underfoot. In the distance, a line of cottonwoods marked the creek that gave the town its name, dry most of the year, but a lifeline during the spring rains. "It's not much farther," Clara said, more to break the silence than because she thought he needed the information. As they crested the final hill, her ranch came into view, and Clara felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Even in the golden light of late afternoon, there was no hiding what the Whitford place had become. The main house listed slightly to the east, its unpainted boards weathered to the color of old bones. Half the fence posts along the front pasture had given up their fight with gravity, leaving gaps wide enough for cattle to wander through if she'd had any cattle left to wander. The barn stood, but barely, its roof patched with mismatched shingles and tar paper. The garden was more weeds than vegetables, and the well pump had been broken for months. She glanced at the man riding beside her. He surveyed the property with those dark, calculating eyes, taking in every broken board and weed-choked garden bed. Clara waited for the judgment she was sure would come, but he simply nodded as if he'd seen worse. "It wasn't always like this," she heard herself saying, then immediately wished she hadn't. What did it matter what he thought? They dismounted near the barn. Clara was about to lead the horses inside when she noticed 3 men on her porch. Her heart sank as she recognized Dale Morrison, the owner of the largest ranch in the valley, flanked by 2 of his hands. Morrison straightened from where he'd been leaning against a porch post, his hand casually resting on the pistol at his hip. He was a big man in his mid-40s with cold gray eyes and the hard, weathered face of someone who'd fought the land and won. His clothes were of better quality than most, in Dry Creek store-bought, rather than homemade, his boots polished, despite the dust. "Well, well," he drawled, his eyes fixed on Clara's companion. "Looks like the rumors are true. You've brought yourself a pet savage, Mrs. Whitford." Clara stepped forward, positioning herself slightly between Morrison and the man she'd bought. "Mr. Morrison, to what do I owe the displeasure?" Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just being neighborly. Thought I'd check on you after hearing about your purchase in town." His gaze shifted to the man behind her. "Didn't expect to see him so soon, though. McKenna must be getting soft." "My money's as good as anyone's," Clara said, her voice cool. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I need to tend to my employee's injuries." Morrison stepped off the porch, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust as he approached. "Now, Clara, I've been patient with you, offered to buy this place at a fair price more than once. But if you're going to endanger yourself and the whole community with your foolishness—" "The only danger here," Clara interrupted, "is from uninvited guests who seem to think they have a say in how I run my property." One of Morrison's men snickered. "Ain't natural a white woman taking up with a savage." "People are talking, ma'am. Saying things that ain't fit for Christian ears." Clara's temper finally snapped. Then perhaps they should spend less time gossiping and more time reading their Bibles, particularly the parts about loving thy neighbor and judge, not lest ye be judged. Morrison stepped closer, and suddenly the man Clara had bought was there, placing himself between Clara and the bigger man. He said nothing, but his presence spoke volumes. "You threatening me, boy?" Morrison snarled. The man remained silent, but he didn't back down. "That's enough." Clara moved around her protector to face Morrison directly. "You need to leave. Now." "This ain't over," Morrison warned. "When that savage shows his true nature, and he will, you'll come begging for help. And maybe I'll give it, if you're willing to be reasonable about selling this worthless patch of dirt. Get off my land." Morrison and his men mounted up, but before riding off, he turned back. "You're making a mistake, Clara. A dangerous one. Don't say you weren't warned." After they'd gone, Clara found herself shaking. The man guided her to the porch steps and gently pressed her to sit. Then he went to the well, drew fresh water, and brought her a cup. "Thank you," she managed, wrapping her hands around the tin cup to still their trembling. He crouched before her, his dark eyes concerned. "This, because of me, I go trouble goes." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "No," she repeated more softly. "The trouble was here long before you. Morrison's been circling like a vulture ever since Jacob died." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "Come on," Clara finally said, rising. "Let's get those wrists tended to, and then we'll see about some supper." Inside the house was clean but sparse. A table with 2 chairs, a wood stove shelves holding a meager collection of dishes and preserves. On the mantel above the cold fireplace sat a single photograph in a tarnished frame. Clara gestured for the man to sit at the table, while she fetched a basin of water soap and strips of clean cloth. Gently, she cleaned the raw wounds left by the shackles, trying not to wince at their depth. As she worked, she was aware of his eyes on her, studying her with quiet intensity. "I'm sorry they're so deep," she said softly. "Had worse." His voice surprised her deeper than she expected, with an accent she couldn't quite place. "Still, they'll need watching for infection." She applied a salve made from herbs she'd gathered herself, then wrapped his wrists in clean bandages. When she finished, he flexed his hands experimentally, then nodded his thanks. "What's your name?" Clara asked, as she put away her supplies. "I can't just keep calling you Sir or Mister." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Samuel Tallbear," she repeated, and he seemed to like the sound of his name on her lips. "Are you hungry, Samuel?" He nodded, and Clara busied herself at the stove, aware of him standing motionless by the table. When she turned, he was looking at the photograph on the mantel. "My husband," Clara said quietly. "Jacob. He died 3 winters ago." Samuel nodded slowly, then moved toward the door. "I sleep where—" Clara hesitated. The proper thing would be to have him sleep in the barn, but the structure was barely sound enough for the horses, let alone a person. And after what had happened with Morrison, she wasn't sure she wanted Samuel that far away. "There's a small room off the kitchen," she said. "It was meant to be a pantry, but it's empty now. There's space for a pallet. Unless you'd prefer the barn." "Room is good," he said simply. "Thank you." Supper was a humble affair, beans, cornbread, and the last of the preserved peaches from 2 summers ago. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Samuel savored each bite as if it were a feast, and Clara found herself wondering how long it had been since he'd had a proper meal. After they'd eaten, Samuel insisted on cleaning up his big hands, surprisingly deft, with the delicate china plates, one of the few fine things Clara had left from her life before. "You said caught stealing horses," Clara ventured as he dried the last plate. "Was that true?" Samuel's expression darkened. "Not stealing, tracking. Horses missing from ranch where I work. Found trail leading to Morrison land. Was following when his men found me." He set the plate down carefully. "They beat. Said I stole. No one listens to Indian." Clara felt anger rise in her throat. "Morrison accused you of stealing his horses when you were actually tracking stolen horses to his property." Samuel nodded. "Smart man. Blame Indian for his crime." That's outrageous." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "We should tell the sheriff." "Sheriff not listen," Samuel interrupted gently. "No proof. Only Indian word against white man." The bitter truth of his statement hung in the air between them. In this territory, a white man's word, especially a wealthy one like Morrison, would always outweigh that of a Native American. "I'm sorry," Clara said, finally feeling the inadequacy of the words. Samuel shrugged. "World as it is, but—" He looked at her, his dark eyes softening. "Not all white people same. You different." Clara felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "I just did what anyone should have done." "No," Samuel said firmly. "What anyone should do and what they do, very different." That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the familiar creaks and groans of the old house. But underneath those sounds was something new, the knowledge that she wasn't alone on the ranch for the first time in 3 years. It should have frightened her, she supposed. Everyone in town certainly expected her to be frightened. Instead, she felt something she couldn't quite name. Not peace exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it. She was almost asleep when she heard its soft words in a language she didn't understand, rising and falling in what sounded like a prayer or chant. Clara slipped from her bed and moved to the window. In the silver moonlight, Samuel knelt in the yard, his face turned to the stars, his voice carrying words she couldn't comprehend, but whose meaning she somehow understood: gratitude, remembrance, hope. Clara watched, feeling like an intruder on something sacred, yet unable to turn away. What kind of man was this, who could endure what he had, and still find cause for prayer? Who had been falsely accused, beaten, chained, and sold, yet maintained such dignity? "What have I done?" she whispered to herself. "Bringing a man with so many secrets into my home." But as she returned to her bed, Clara felt the first stirrings of something she had thought died with Jacob, a sense that tomorrow might hold more than just struggle and survival. That perhaps in saving this man, she might have begun to save herself as well. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Clara emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee. She found Samuel already at work, splitting wood behind the barn with smooth, efficient strokes. His shirt hung on a nearby post, and she could see the muscles in his back, working beneath bronze skin still marked by fading bruises. "You're up early," she said, offering him one of the cups. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Sun up, work begins." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "I thought we might work on the fence today," Clara said finally. "It's been down so long I'm afraid any cattle I might buy would just wander off." Samuel nodded his eyes, already assessing the broken posts and sagging wire. "Wood rot. Need new posts. Have tools." "Jacob's tools are in the shed," Clara said, pointing to a small structure near the barn. "I've kept them oiled, but I'm afraid I'm not much use with most of them." Samuel finished his coffee and handed her back the cup. "I show you. Not hard, just need knowing how." True to his word, Samuel proved to be a patient teacher. He showed Clara how to select the right tools, how to measure and cut, how to set posts so they wouldn't lean with the first strong wind. His English improved as he relaxed, becoming more fluid, if still somewhat broken. By midday, they had replaced 3 fence posts and straightened 2 more. Clara was surprised at how much they'd accomplished, and how satisfying it felt to see a portion of her fence standing straight again. "You've done this before," she observed as they paused to drink water from the well. Samuel's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Many jobs. Ranch hand, hunter, tracker. Learn from watching." "You're a quick study." "Have to be. No one teaches Indian. Must learn by seeing." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, made Clara's heart ache. What would this man have become with the opportunities her brothers had enjoyed? With schooling, with mentors, with doors open instead of slammed shut. They returned to work, and Clara found that they fell into an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's needs without much talk. She was surprised to find herself enjoying the labor, something she had come to dread in the lonely years since Jacob's death. As the afternoon wore on, Clara noticed Samuel frequently looking toward the well. Finally, during a break, he approached it, examining the pump mechanism with practiced eyes. "Broken long?" he asked, pointing to the rusted handle. "Almost a year," Clara admitted. "I've been hauling water up with the bucket. The pump leather dried out, and I couldn't figure how to replace it." Without another word, Samuel began disassembling the pump, his big hands surprisingly dexterous with the small parts. Clara watched, fascinated, as he examined each piece, cleaned it, then reassembled the mechanism with a new leather gasket he'd cut from a scrap in Jacob's workshop. "Try now," he said, stepping back. Clara gripped the handle and pushed down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a gurgling cough, water spurted from the spout, growing stronger with each pump until a steady stream flowed into the waiting bucket. "It works!" Clara exclaimed, delight bubbling up inside her. "Samuel, that's wonderful!" For the first time, Samuel smiled fully, a transformation that made him suddenly younger, his face illuminated with quiet pride. "Samuel Tallbear," he said, pointing to himself as if properly introducing himself now that he'd proven his worth. "Clara Whitford," she replied, extending her hand as she would to any skilled craftsman. He took it carefully, his calloused palm warm against hers. It was a small moment, perhaps, but Clara felt something shift between them, a recognition of mutual respect that transcended their unusual circumstances. That evening, as they ate a simple supper, Clara found herself talking about Jacob, not with the usual weight of grief, but with something closer to fondness. "He was terrible with chickens," she said, smiling at the memory. "They'd scatter every time he came near the coop. He'd curse and stomp around, which only made it worse. But horses, he could gentle the wildest horse with just his voice and hands." Samuel listened occasionally, asking a question that showed he was paying attention. When Clara asked about his own life before he spoke haltingly of learning to track with his grandfather, of ceremonies by firelight, of a world that seemed to grow smaller each year as more settlers arrived. "You're English," Clara said. "You speak it well." His face darkened. 3 years at mission school. They take us from families cut hair, forbid our language, beat us if we speak it." He touched his chest. "They try to kill the Indian, save the man, but cannot kill what lives here." "Good," Clara said fiercely. "Don't let them." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant cry of a coyote. Through the window, Clara could see the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the sky. "Tomorrow," Samuel said suddenly, "I fix roof. Rain come soon. Need good roof." Clara started to protest that he didn't need to work so hard, that he should rest and recover. But something in his expression stopped her. This wasn't servitude, it was a man reclaiming his dignity through skilled labor, through creating rather than destroying. "Thank you," she said instead. "I'd appreciate that." The next morning dawned clear, but Clara could see clouds building on the western horizon, still distant, but a promise of the seasonal rains to come. Samuel was already on the roof when she emerged with coffee, moving with the sure-footed confidence of a mountain goat as he replaced damaged shingles. Clara spent the morning in the garden pulling weeds that had threatened to overtake her vegetables. The work was tedious but satisfying, and by noon she had cleared enough space to see that her tomatoes and beans might yet produce a decent harvest. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear the approaching rider until he was almost at the gate. Looking up, she recognized Tom Bradley, the doctor's son sitting uncomfortably on his father's mare. "Mrs. Whitford," he called, removing his hat. "I've brought something for you." Clara straightened, wiping her hands on her apron as she walked to meet him. Tom was about 20, with earnest blue eyes and a shock of sandy hair that never seemed to stay combed. Unlike many of the young men in Dry Creek, he treated Clara with genuine respect rather than condescension. "What is it, Tom?" she asked, noting the way his eyes darted nervously to where Samuel worked on the roof. Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out a letter. "This came on the stage yesterday. Pa said to bring it out to you." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "There's talk in town, ma'am. Morrison's been stirring folks up saying things that ain't true." Clara's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. Just be careful is all." Tom glanced again at Samuel, who had paused in his work to observe the visitor. "Some of the men are getting worked up about it." "Thank you for the warning, Tom, and for bringing the letter." Tom nodded, replaced his hat, and turned his horse back toward town. As he rode away, Clara examined the envelope. The return address was from Chicago, her sister, Margaret. With trembling fingers she opened it and read, "Dearest Clara, word has reached us of your recent actions. I cannot express how shocked and dismayed we are to hear that you have taken a savage into your home. Have you completely lost your senses? Mother is beside herself with worry. I implore you to reconsider this madness, sell the ranch, and come home where you belong. You cannot continue this unnatural existence, playing at being a man, and now consorting with heathens. Think of Jacob's memory, if nothing else. Your loving sister, Margaret." Clara crumpled the letter in her fist, her chest heaving with suppressed anger. After a moment, she smoothed it out again, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her pocket. She would respond later when she could trust herself to be civil. When she looked up, Samuel had descended from the roof and stood nearby, his dark eyes concerned. "Bad news?" he asked quietly. "My sister," Clara said bitterly. "Apparently, news travels fast even to Chicago. She thinks I should sell the ranch and return east where I can be a proper widow, wearing black and pouring tea for the rest of my days." "You want this?" "No." The word exploded from her. "This is my home. Jacob and I built this life together, and I won't abandon it just because—" She gestured helplessly. "Because it's hard. Because I'm alone." "Not alone now," Samuel said quietly. Clara looked at him, standing there with dirt on his hands, from working her roof sweat on his brow, from labor freely given, and felt something shift inside her chest. "No," she agreed softly. "Not alone." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of shared understanding between them. Then Samuel nodded toward the western horizon, where the clouds had grown noticeably darker. "Storm comes. Need to finish roof." As he climbed back up the ladder, Clara returned to her garden with renewed purpose. Whatever the town thought, whatever her family believed, she knew in her heart that she had made the right decision that day in the square. And as the first distant rumble of thunder reached her ears, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, not just determination to survive, but hope that she might truly live again. The clouds were gathering more quickly now, dark and heavy with the promise of rain. Clara worked faster, determined to salvage as many vegetables as possible before the downpour. She was so focused on her task that she didn't hear the approaching horses until they were almost at her gate. Looking up, she felt her heart sink. 3 riders approached Dale Morrison, flanked by the Harmon brothers Jim and Pete, both known for their drinking and quick tempers. None of the men were smiling. Samuel, still on the roof, had gone very still, watching the newcomers with wary eyes. "Mrs. Whitford," Morrison called, his voice carrying that particular tone of false courtesy that set Clara's teeth on edge. "Might we have a word?" Clara straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "I believe we said all we needed to say yesterday, Mr. Morrison." Morrison dismounted his boots, raising small clouds of dust as he approached. The Harmon brothers remained on their horses, hands resting casually near their holstered pistols. "I've been thinking about your situation," Morrison said, his eyes flickering to Samuel on the roof. "And I've come to offer you a solution that benefits us both." "I wasn't aware I had a situation that needed solving," Clara replied coolly. Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Come now, Clara. We both know this ranch is failing. You can barely keep up with the repairs, let alone make it profitable again. And now you've taken in, well," he gestured toward Samuel, "you've made choices that have isolated you from decent society. If by decent society you mean people who would sell a human being like cattle, then I'm happy to be isolated." Morrison's face hardened. "I'm prepared to be generous given the circumstances. $500 for the entire property. That's more than fair considering the state of things." $500 was a fraction of what the land was worth, even in its current condition, and they both knew it. But it was more than Clara could hope to get from anyone else in the valley, especially now. "My land is not for sale, Mr. Morrison. Not to you, not to anyone. Everything's for sale, Clara. It's just a matter of price." Morrison stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The bank raised your interest rate, didn't they?" Tom Bradley might have delivered that letter yesterday. Clara felt a chill run through her. How could Morrison know about the bank's letter? "That's none of your business." "Oh, but it is." Morrison smiled thinly. "You see, I've bought your mortgage from the bank. You don't owe them anymore, you owe me. And I'm calling in the loan. You have 30 days to pay in full, or this land becomes mine." Clara felt as if she'd been struck. The bank had sold her mortgage. Could they do that? The questions must have shown on her face, because Morrison's smile widened. "It's all legal, I assure you. Ask Judge Harrison if you don't believe me." "You snake," Clara hissed. "You've been planning this all along." Morrison shrugged. "Business is business. Nothing personal." "It feels mighty personal from where I'm standing." A movement caught her eye. Samuel had descended from the roof and now stood at the corner of the house, a hammer hanging from his hand. His posture was relaxed, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the readiness in his stance. "Your pet savage seems agitated." Jim Harmon observed his hand moving closer to his gun. "Leave him be," Clara warned. "He's done nothing to you." "Yet," Pete Harmon added with a nasty grin, "just a matter of time before he shows his true nature." Samuel remained motionless, his dark eyes fixed on Morrison. $500, Morrison repeated. "Take it now, walk away clean, or wait 30 days and leave with nothing. Your choice, Clara." "Get off my land," Clara said, her voice low and dangerous. "Now." Morrison studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Have it your way, but remember, 30 days. He turned and mounted his horse. "Come on, boys. Mrs. Whitford needs time to consider her options." As they rode away, Clara found herself shaking with rage and fear. The 30-day deadline hung over her like an executioner's axe. There was no way she could raise enough money to pay off the mortgage in that time, not with what little the ranch produced. Samuel approached cautiously, his eyes asking a question he didn't voice. "He bought my mortgage from the bank," Clara explained, her voice tight. "If I can't pay it off in 30 days, I lose everything." Samuel's brow furrowed. "How much?" "More than I could hope to earn in a year, let alone a month." Clara laughed bitterly. "He's planned this perfectly." the drought the repairs needed, and now, she gestured helplessly at Samuel, now he can paint me as unstable, dangerous to the community. No one will help. I help, Samuel said simply. Clara looked at him, this man she'd known for barely 2 days, and felt a lump form in her throat. You've already helped more than you know. But this, she shook her head, this needs more than strong hands and a willing heart. The first fat drops of rain began to fall splattering in the dust at their feet. The storm had arrived. Inside, Samuel said gently, guiding her toward the house. Rain comes, and they barely made it to the porch before the heavens opened. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the yard into a sea of mud within minutes. Clara watched, wondering if the rain was washing away her last hopes, along with the summer dust. Inside, Samuel busied himself lighting the lamps against the sudden darkness. Clara sank into a chair at the table, her mind racing. There had to be a way out of this trap, but she couldn't see it. Why Morrison want land so bad? Samuel asked, setting a cup of coffee before her. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm mug, grateful for its comfort. It's the water rights, I think. This property controls access to the creek that feeds the whole eastern valley. In a drought year like this, that's worth more than gold. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Smart man. Control water, control valley. Yes, and he's been trying to buy up all the small ranches for years. Mine is one of the last holdouts. Clara sipped her coffee, wincing at its bitterness. Jacob always said Morrison was too eager to expand. Said a man who wants everything usually ends up with nothing. Wise man, your husband. Clara smiled sadly. He was. Stubborn, too. Probably why I loved him so much. The rain continued to hammer on the roof, but there were no leaks. Samuel's work had seen to that. The sound was almost peaceful, a reminder that despite everything, life continued, seasons changed, and the land endured. We find way, Samuel said firmly, not give up. Clara looked at him, this man who had every reason to be bitter, to hate to give up yet, who spoke of hope with such conviction. Why are you helping me? She asked softly. You could leave, find work elsewhere. You don't owe me anything. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. You see me as man, he said finally. Not savage, not less than, just man. This is gift greater than freedom. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I only did what was right. In world where few do what is right, doing right is brave. Samuel's gaze held hers. You brave woman, Clara Whitford. I stand with brave. In that moment, with rain drumming on the roof and thunder rolling across the valley, Clara felt something crack open inside her, a door she had sealed shut when they buried Jacob. Behind it lay not just grief, but hope. Not just memory, but possibility. Thank you, she whispered, not trusting herself to say more. Samuel nodded once, understanding in his eyes. Then he rose and moved to the window, watching the storm lash the land. Rain good, he said, brings life, washes clean. Tomorrow we see what grows. Clara joined him at the window, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. Together, they watched the storm transform their world, neither speaking of the storm yet to come. The storm raged through the night wind, howling around the eaves of the old farmhouse like a pack of hungry wolves. Inside, Clara lay awake listening to the creaks and groans of the timbers as they withstood nature's fury. The roof held not a single drop, finding its way through the newly repaired shingles. Samuel's handiwork had proven sound. Morning brought clear skies and a transformed landscape. Clara stepped onto the porch, cradling a steaming cup of coffee, and surveyed her property. The parched earth had drunk deeply of the rain, and already a hint of green showed where before there had been only dust. The creek that gave Dry Creek its ironic name now ran swift and full, gurgling over stones long exposed to the sun. "Water brings promise," Samuel said, appearing silently beside her. He too held a cup of coffee, the steam rising between them in the cool morning air. If only it could wash away Morrison's threat as easily as it washed away the dust, Clara replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Samuel's dark eyes studied the horizon thoughtfully. "Land remembers," he said after a moment. "Bad times, good times. Land waits. For hands that know, for hearts that stay." Clara glanced at him, struck by the quiet wisdom in his words. In the golden light of dawn, with his face relaxed and open, Samuel looked younger, the lines of hardship less pronounced. She found herself wondering about the life he might have led, if fate had been kinder. "The fence will need checking after that wind," she said, returning to practical matters. "And I should see what's left of the garden." Samuel nodded. "I checked creek first. High water good for irrigation, bad for banks." They set about their tasks with quiet efficiency, falling into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural for two people who had been strangers just days before. Clara found her vegetable garden largely intact, though some of the more delicate plants had been flattened by the driving rain. She was on her knees, carefully staking a fallen tomato plant, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart sank, expecting Morrison or his men returning to press their advantage. Instead, she looked up to see an elderly couple in a wagon making their slow way up the muddy track to her ranch. Lars and Ingrid Olsen, Norwegian immigrants who had settled in the valley a decade before Clara and Jacob arrived. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitford." Lars called, his accent still thick despite his years in America. He reined the horses to a stop near the garden gate. "We bring supplies. Storm not catch you too bad, ja." Clara straightened, brushing dirt from her hands as she approached the wagon. "Mr. Olsen." "Mrs. Olsen, this is a surprise. We weathered it well enough, thank you." Ingrid, a tiny woman with steel-gray hair braided coronet-style around her head, was already climbing down from the wagon with surprising agility for her age. "Heard in town about Morrison," she said without preamble. "That man!" She spat to the side, a most unladylike gesture that made Clara smile despite herself. "He think he own valley." Lars nodded solemnly. "We bring flour, salt, some preserves," Ingrid made. "And this," he pulled out a rifle from under the wagon seat. "Extra we have, you maybe need." Clara felt her throat tighten. I can't pay you for all this." "Not for paying," Ingrid said firmly, pressing a small bundle into Clara's hands. "Seeds," she explained. "From my garden. Plant after next rain. Give good vegetables." Samuel had appeared from the direction of the creek, watching the scene unfold with cautious eyes. Lars spotted him and gave a short nod of acknowledgement. "You are the one who helps Mrs. Whitford," he said. It wasn't a question. Samuel nodded warily. "Good," Ingrid declared decisively. "She needs help, tries to do too much alone." She fixed Clara with a stern look. "Like my Lars, when we first come here. Too proud to ask for help, nearly killed himself trying to clear fields alone." "Ingrid," Lars began gently, but his wife wasn't finished. "No, she should hear. We come to this country with nothing. People help us. Some call us squareheads, dumb Norwegians, but others see just people trying to make life. Like you." She looked at Samuel again. "Just men trying to make life." Clara felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. The Olsons had always been kind to her, but this generosity in the face of what must be town-wide condemnation touched her deeply. "Thank you," she managed. "Both of you." Samuel stepped forward and bowed slightly to the elderly couple. "Your kindness honors us," he said formally. "We will not forget." Lars nodded approvingly. "You come to our farm if trouble comes. We old, but not helpless. And we remember what it is to be strangers, to be hated for being different." After the Olsons left, Clara and Samuel carried the supplies inside in thoughtful silence. The visit had shown them that not everyone in the community shared Morrison's hatred. "Good people," Samuel said as they put away the last of the supplies. "Yes," Clara agreed. "I had forgotten there were still some left." The day passed in honest labor mending fences damaged by the storm, clearing fallen branches, reinforcing the chicken coop. By late afternoon, Clara's muscles ached pleasantly from the work, a reminder that she was alive and capable. She was feeding the chickens when Samuel approached something clasped in his hand. "Found by creek," he said, holding out a small, carved wooden figure of a horse. It was exquisitely detailed, the animal caught mid-stride, mane and tail flowing with suggested motion. "Made by Jacob." Clara took the figurine, her fingers tracing the familiar curves. "Yes," she said softly. "He liked to carve in the evenings, said it helped him think." She looked up at Samuel, a question in her eyes. "How did you know it was his work?" Samuel's expression was gentle. "Same care as fence posts, same respect for wood. Man shows spirit in work." Clara carefully tucked the figurine into her pocket. It was a small treasure, a piece of Jacob returned to her by this most unexpected ally. "Thank you for finding this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Samuel nodded once, understanding more than she had said. "We'll search more when water lower. Maybe find other treasures." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clara found herself telling Samuel about her life before her childhood in Pennsylvania, meeting Jacob at a church social, their decision to seek their fortune in the West. "We were so young," she said, smiling at the memory. "So certain we could tame this land, build something lasting. The first winter nearly broke us. But Jacob, he never lost faith." She fell silent, lost in memories both sweet and bitter. "You have his strength," Samuel observed quietly. "Same fierce heart." Clara glanced at him, surprised by the personal observation. "I don't know about that. Some days it feels like I'm just existing, not living, not dying, just continuing." "Until now," Samuel said, his dark eyes holding hers. The simple statement hung in the air between them, filled with unspoken meaning. Until now, until a moment of courage in a dusty town square had set them both on a new path. Clara looked away first, suddenly conscious of the intimacy of the moment. "It's getting late," she said, rising from her chair. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another busy day." Samuel remained seated, his gaze fixed on the last sliver of sun disappearing behind the mountains. "Sleep well, Clara Whitford," he said softly. Inside, Clara moved through her evening routine by lamplight, washing dishes, checking the stove, laying out clothes for tomorrow. But her mind kept returning to that moment on the porch, to the way Samuel had looked at her, to the simple words that had stirred something long dormant within her. She was about to retire when a knock came at the door. Samuel stood there, his expression troubled. "What is it?" Clara asked, alarmed by his demeanor. "Riders," he said, simply pointing toward the western ridge. "Watching." Clara felt her blood run cold. She moved to the window and peered out into the gathering darkness. At first, she saw nothing. Then, silhouetted against the last light in the sky, she made out 3 mounted figures on the distant ridge. "Morrison's men," she whispered. Samuel nodded grimly. "Think so? Just watching now. Maybe more later." Clara's hand went instinctively to the rifle Lars had brought. "Do you think they'll come tonight?" "No," Samuel said after a moment's consideration. "Show strength first. Try to frighten. Come later if fear works." "Well, it won't work," Clara said with more conviction than she felt. "We've done nothing wrong. This is my land, my home." Samuel's eyes held a mixture of admiration and concern. "Sleep," he advised gently. "I watch tonight." Clara wanted to protest, to insist he needed rest too, but the determined set of his jaw told her it would be futile. "Wake me in a few hours," she said instead. "I'll take a turn." Samuel nodded, though Clara suspected he had no intention of waking her. He turned to go, then paused. "Clara," he said, using her given name for the first time, "you are not alone now." The simple statement warmed her more than it should have. "No," she agreed softly. "I'm not." Sleep came fitfully, her dreams haunted by shadowy riders and Morrison's cold eyes. She woke before dawn, the house still and quiet around her. Pulling on her robe, Clara padded to the front window. Samuel sat on the porch steps, a silent guardian in the pale, pre-dawn light. Clara watched him for a moment, struck by the tableau, this man she barely knew keeping vigil over her home, over her. There was something ancient in his stillness, a patience born of a different relationship with time than her own restless Western urgency. Quietly, she slipped outside to join him. The morning air was cool dew heavy on the grass, the world hushed in that sacred moment before day fully declares itself. "You didn't wake me," she said softly, settling beside him on the step. "No need," Samuel replied. No trouble came. "Are they still out there, the riders?" Samuel shook his head. "Left when moon set. Will return." They sat in companionable silence, watching as the eastern sky lightened first gray, then pink, then blazing gold, as the sun crested the distant mountains. "Beautiful," Samuel murmured, his eyes reflecting the dawn light. "Yes," Clara agreed, though she found herself looking at his profile rather than the sunrise. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. A single rider this time approaching from the direction of town. Clara tensed, but Samuel laid a reassuring hand on her arm. "Not threat," he said, rising smoothly to his feet. "Young man from town. Doctor's son." Sure enough, as the rider drew closer, Clara recognized Tom Bradley on his father's mare. The young man looked tired, as if he'd been riding hard. "Mrs. Whitford," he called as he approached. "I needed to warn you." He pulled his horse up short when he saw Samuel standing beside Clara on the porch, his eyes widening slightly before he composed himself. "Mr. Tallbear," he acknowledged with a nod. "What is it, Tom?" Clara asked, concern creeping into her voice. Tom dismounted, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "There was trouble in town last night," he said, his voice low. "At the saloon. Morrison and the Harmon brothers were drinking, getting worked up about your situation here." Clara's jaw tightened. "Go on." "They were talking about forming a committee to protect the community." Tom continued, his disgust evident. "Reverend Blackwood was there too, saying it was a moral imperative to separate you from... He glanced uncomfortably at Samuel. "From me," Samuel finished calmly. Tom nodded. "They were planning to ride out here tonight. A dozen men, at least. My pa tried to talk sense into them, but Morrison's got them all riled up." Clara felt a chill despite the warming morning air. "A lynch mob," she said flatly. "They're calling it a citizens' committee." Tom replied grimly. But, yes, ma'am, that's what it amounts to. Samuel had gone very still, his face expressionless, but Clara could sense the tension radiating from him. This was exactly the kind of justice he had experienced before, swift, brutal, and blind to truth. "Thank you for the warning, Tom," Clara said, her mind racing. "You've taken a risk coming here." Tom straightened, looking surprisingly adult in that moment. "It's not right what they're planning. My pa says a man should be judged by his character, not the color of his skin. And you—" He paused, gathering courage. "You've been nothing but kind to our family since we came to Dry Creek. When Ma was sick last winter, you brought soup every day for a week." Clara was touched by the young man's loyalty. "Your mother would have done the same for me." "Still," Tom insisted, "it's not right. I wanted you to have time to prepare. Or leave, if that's what you decide." "We're not leaving," Clara said firmly. "This is my home, and Samuel has done nothing wrong." Tom looked between them, something like admiration in his young face. "I figured you'd say that," he said. "Pa thought so too. He sent these." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Extra ammunition for your rifle. And this," he handed Clara a folded paper. "It's a letter stating that he examined Mr. Tallbear professionally and found him to be of sound mind and not a danger to anyone. It's not much, but it might help if the sheriff gets involved." Clara was momentarily speechless at this unexpected support. "Thank your father for us," she finally managed. Tell him Jacob would have been proud to call him friend." Tom nodded, replacing his hat. "I should get back before anyone notices I'm gone." He hesitated, then added, "If you need help, well, our house is always open to you. Both of you," he clarified with a nod to Samuel. After Tom rode away, Clara and Samuel stood in silence, the beautiful dawn now overshadowed by the threat to come. "You should go," Samuel said finally. "To town, to Bradley's house. Not safe here tonight." Clara turned to him incredulous. "And leave you to face them alone? Absolutely not." "Clara—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "I won't run. I won't hide. And I certainly won't abandon you to those— Words failed her in her anger. Samuel studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he smiled a small, genuine smile that transformed his solemn face. "Fierce heart," he said softly. "Like I said." They spent the day preparing for the night to come. Clara cleaned and loaded Jacob's rifle and the one Lars had brought, while Samuel reinforced the shutters on the windows and moved furniture to create defensive positions inside the house. They worked with grim efficiency, speaking little but understanding each other's intentions without need for many words. By mid-afternoon, they had done all they could. The house was as secure as they could make it, with clear lines of sight to all approaches. Water buckets stood ready in case of fire, and they had moved the horses to a small hidden draw behind the barn, where they would be safe from stray bullets. Clara found Samuel sitting at the kitchen table, carefully whittling a piece of wood. She watched his strong hands move with precision, shaping something from nothing with practiced ease. "What are you making?" she asked, setting a cup of coffee before him. Samuel held up the emerging shape, another horse, this one rearing on its hind legs. "For courage," he explained. "My people believe spirit animals lend strength when carved with intention." Clara sat across from him, cradling her own cup. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You have a gift." Samuel shrugged modestly. "Grandfather taught. Said hands remember what mind forgets." They sat in companionable silence, The only sound the scrape of Samuel's knife against wood and the occasional call of a bird outside. Despite the danger looming ahead, Clara felt a curious peace in this moment, as if they had carved out a small space of normalcy in a world gone mad. "Samuel," she said suddenly, "what will you do when this is over, if we survive tonight, if we somehow find a way to pay Morrison and keep the ranch, what then?" Samuel's hands stilled his dark eyes, lifting to meet hers. "Not thought beyond now," he admitted. "For many seasons, just survive, day to day." He hesitated, then added quietly, "But here, with you, first time, think maybe more." The simple admission hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Clara felt her heartbeat quicken, both frightened and exhilarated by what remained unspoken. Before she could respond, they heard it, the distant thunder of hooves, many riders approaching fast. Their time had run out. "They come," Samuel said, rising smoothly to his feet. "Earlier than thought." Clara moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. Her blood ran cold at the sight. At least a dozen riders approached, some carrying torches, despite the daylight, a clear message of their intentions. At their head rode Dale Morrison, his face set in grim determination, and beside him, incongruously, Reverend Blackwood in his black coat and white collar. "God help us," Clara whispered. Samuel appeared beside her, his presence solid and reassuring despite the danger. "Many guns," he observed calmly, "but also eyes watching. They know we see. Makes some think twice." Clara nodded, drawing strength from his composure. "I'll take the front," she said, hefting Jacob's rifle. "You watch the back. Don't shoot unless they shoot first." Samuel touched her arm gently. "Be careful," he said, his eyes conveying what words could not. "You too," Clara replied softly. The riders drew up in the yard, fanning out to surround the house. Morrison dismounted, followed by Reverend Blackwood and several others, including the Harmon brothers. The rest remained on horseback, forming an intimidating perimeter. "Mrs. Whitford," Morrison called out, "we've come to talk. No need to hide in there." Clara took a deep breath, then stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not aimed. She was conscious of Samuel positioning himself at the corner of the house, watching her back. "This doesn't look much like talk to me, Mr. Morrison," she called back, eyeing the torches and guns. "Looks more like a mob." Reverend Blackwood stepped forward, his thin face pinched with righteous fervor. "We are concerned citizens, Mrs. Whitford, come to save you from your own folly. This situation has gone on long enough. You're living in sin with a heathen, bringing shame upon yourself and danger to our community." "I'm doing nothing of the sort," Clara replied coldly. "Mr. Tallbear works for me. We've broken no laws." Jim Harmon spat tobacco juice near her porch steps. "Don't matter where he sleeps. Ain't natural a white woman taking up with a savage. Watch your mouth on my property," Clara warned, her finger moving closer to the rifle's trigger. "Or what?" Pete Harmon sneered. "You'll have your pet Indian scalp us." Samuel stepped forward then, and even in the warm afternoon light, there was something in his bearing that made the men shift nervously. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence alone was a statement. "See?" Blackwood pointed dramatically. "He threatens good Christian men. This is what comes of defying God's natural order." "The only threat here," Clara said, her voice cutting through the tension, "is from men who ride to a woman's home carrying torches like a lynch mob. Now state your business plainly, or get off my land." Morrison stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his pistol. We've come to give you one last chance, Clara. Send this savage away. Return to town where decent folk can look after you. I'm still willing to buy this worthless piece of land for $500 more than generous, considering the circumstances. And if I refuse, Morrison's eyes hardened, then we'll remove the Indian ourselves, for your own protection and the good of the community. You take one step toward him, Clara said, raising her rifle, and I'll put a bullet in you, Dale Morrison. That's a promise. A tense silence fell over the yard. Several men shifted uncomfortably clearly, not having expected armed resistance from a woman they considered misguided, but essentially harmless. It was Samuel who broke the impasse, stepping forward to stand beside Clara. To everyone's surprise, he spoke not in the broken English they expected, but in clear, articulate sentences. "This land," he said, his deep voice carrying across the yard, "belongs to Mrs. Whitford. She has offered me honest work and fair treatment, which is more than most of you have done. I have harmed no one in this valley. The only crime I committed was being born with darker skin than yours." The men stared, visibly shocked by his eloquence. Clara felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by confusion. Samuel had never spoken like this before. His English had been broken, hesitant. Had it all been an act? Morrison recovered first, his face darkening with anger. "Don't try to fool us with your missionary school education, boy. We know what you are." "And what is that exactly?" came a new voice from the edge of the gathering. All heads turned to see Sheriff McKenna riding slowly into the yard, his badge catching the afternoon sun. Behind him came Doc Bradley and his son Tom, along with Lars Olson and, surprisingly, the Garrett family from the neighboring ranch. "This doesn't concern you, Sheriff," Morrison said tightly. "A dozen armed men surrounding a woman's home, I'd say that concerns me quite a bit." McKenna dismounted, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Especially when that woman has broken no law I'm aware of." "She's harboring a dangerous savage," Reverend Blackwood protested. "Is that so?" McKenna turned to Samuel. "You feeling dangerous today, Tallbear?" "No, sir," Samuel replied calmly. "Just trying to finish mending Mrs. Whitford's fences before the next rain." A few of the mounted men chuckled despite themselves, the tension easing slightly. "He's a thief," Morrison insisted. "Caught stealing horses from my ranch. That's why he was sold in the first place." "Funny thing about that," McKenna said, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "I've been looking into that case, and some things don't quite add up. For instance, why those horses you claimed he stole had your brand painted over another brand, almost like they weren't your horses to begin with." A murmur went through the crowd. Morrison's face flushed red. "That's a damned lie." "Is it?" McKenna produced a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Because I have a statement here from your former ranch hand, Billy Cochran. Says you had him steal horses from the reservation lands to the north. Says Tallbear here was tracking those horses when your men caught him." Clara glanced at Samuel, whose face remained impassive, though his eyes gleamed with something that might have been satisfaction. "This is outrageous," Morrison spluttered. "You'd take the word of a drunk like Cochran over mine, over Reverend Blackwood's." "I take evidence where I find it," McKenna replied coolly. "And speaking of evidence, I'd be mighty interested to know why you're so set on getting Mrs. Whitford's land. Wouldn't have anything to do with the survey maps I found in your office, would it? The ones showing a planned railroad spur coming right through this property." A shocked silence fell over the gathering. Clara felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. A railroad that would make her modest ranch worth a fortune, and explained Morrison's desperate tactics. Morrison's hand moved toward his gun, but McKenna was faster, his Colt appearing as if by magic. "I wouldn't," the sheriff said quietly. "Not unless you want to see how fast I can ventilate that expensive vest of yours." The tension was broken by the sound of approaching horses, many horses moving fast. All eyes turned to see a cloud of dust rising on the road from town. "What now?" Clara murmured, her nerves already stretched to breaking. Samuel moved protectively closer to her, his body tense and ready. But as the riders came into view, Clara gasped in surprise. Leading the column was a man in an army uniform flanked by a dozen Indian scouts. Behind them came wagons filled with women and children, Native American families, their faces wary but determined. "Captain James Hollister, 7th Cavalry," the officer announced as he reined in his horse. "I'm looking for Samuel Tallbear." Samuel stepped forward, his bearing suddenly military despite his civilian clothes. "I am Tallbear," the captain nodded briskly. "We've been searching for you for months, sir, ever since the incident at Thunder Creek." "What incident?" Clara asked, confusion evident in her voice. Captain Hollister turned to her with a respectful nod. "Ma'am, this man was working as a scout and interpreter for the Army when he uncovered evidence of illegal land seizures and horse theft targeting reservation lands. He was on his way to Fort Laramie with documentation when he disappeared. We feared him dead." Clara turned to Samuel, 1,000 questions in her eyes. "You were an Army scout." Samuel nodded, regret written across his features. "I was tracking stolen horses. Morrison's men found me first. Took papers, beat me, turned me in as thief." His English had reverted to its broken pattern, as if the strain of the moment had stripped away his careful eloquence. "The papers were recovered from Morrison's office during a legal search this morning." Sheriff McKenna added, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Along with evidence of multiple land frauds, including attempts to alter Mrs. Whitford's mortgage terms." Morrison's face had gone deathly pale. "This is a setup," he hissed. "You can't prove anything." "Oh, but we can," Captain Hollister countered. "Your former clerk was most cooperative once we explained the seriousness of the charges. Conspiracy, fraud, theft of government property, assault on a federal agent. Mr. Tallbear's official status makes that last one particularly serious." Clara's head was spinning. Samuel, her quiet, hard-working Samuel, was a federal agent. He had been playing a role all this time. She felt a stab of betrayal, quickly followed by confusion. Why hadn't he told her, "Sheriff, I demand you arrest these men for trespassing on my property"? Morrison blustered, a desperate edge to his voice. "Your property?" McKenna raised an eyebrow. "Seems to me the only property you legally own is your ranch. These fraudulent land claims won't hold up in court." As if on cue, several of Morrison's Citizens Committee began to drift away, sensing which way the wind was blowing. No one wanted to be associated with a man facing federal charges. "Mrs. Whitford," Captain Hollister said, turning to Clara, "on behalf of the United States Army, I apologize for any distress this situation has caused you. Mr. Tallbear was operating under orders when he was unlawfully detained." Clara nodded numbly, still trying to process this radical shift in her understanding. The captain continued, "The families you see here are returning to their ancestral lands on the reservation to the Northlands that were illegally seized through the same fraud scheme that targeted your property. Mr. Tallbear was instrumental in exposing this conspiracy." Clara looked at the families in the wagons, women clutching children close, old men with dignity in their bearing, despite their circumstances, young men with wary, watchful eyes. They had lost everything, just as she had nearly lost her ranch. "They are welcome to rest here before continuing their journey," she heard herself saying. "There's water and grazing for the horses." Samuel's eyes met hers, gratitude, and something deeper shining in their dark depths. "Thank you," he said softly. Morrison, seeing his power and influence crumbling before his eyes, made one desperate play. "You're all fools," he shouted. This land is worth a fortune with the railroad coming. I offered you $500 out of charity. Clara, you could have been rich. Sheriff, I believe you have some arrests to make, Clara said calmly, ignoring Morrison's outburst. McKenna nodded, producing a pair of handcuffs. Dale Morrison, you're under arrest for fraud conspiracy and a whole list of other charges I'll enjoy reading to you back in town. He turned to the Harmon brothers. You boys want to join him, or do you want to start talking about who set fire to Mrs. Whitford's barn last week? Jim Harmon's face went slack with fear. It was Morrison's idea. He paid us to scare her off the land. You yellow-bellied coward, Morrison snarled as McKenna cuffed his hands behind his back. Takes one to know one, McKenna replied dryly. Doc, would you mind helping me escort these gentlemen back to town? I think they have a lot to tell Judge Harrison when he arrives tomorrow. As Morrison and his conspirators were led away, the tension in the yard gradually dissipated. The remaining townspeople approached Clara tentatively, as if unsure of their welcome after days of shunning her. Mrs. Whitford, Paul Garrett said, removing his hat, I owe you an apology. I listened to Morrison's lies instead of my own judgment. You've been a good neighbor to us, and I was wrong. We all were. Doc Bradley added, his weathered face creased with regret. It's easy to fear what we don't understand. Harder to stand up for what's right, like you did. Clara felt tears threatening, but blinked them back. Thank you, she said simply. Your support means more than you know. As the townspeople drifted away, Clara found herself alone with Samuel, or rather the man she had known as Samuel. The Native American families had made camp in the meadow beyond the barn, their fires dotting the landscape like earthbound stars as dusk fell. You lied to me, Clara said quietly when they were finally alone on the porch. Samuel sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. Not lie. Not tell all truth. Different. Your English, Clara began, is as you hear now, he finished. Better when calm, worse when tired or afraid. He looked at her directly. Easier for white men to underestimate Indian who speaks poorly. Learn this lesson early. Clara considered this, recognizing the bitter wisdom in his strategy. Why didn't you tell me who you really were? That you were working for the army? At first, not know if trust you, Samuel admitted. Then, he paused, searching for words, then afraid. Afraid you see different man. Not Samuel who works hard, fixes roof, mends fence. Just government Indian using you for shelter. Were you, Clara asked the question that had been burning inside her, finally voiced. Using me. Samuel stepped closer, his dark eyes intent on hers. No, he said firmly. Choose to stay when could have left. Choose to help when could have hidden. Choose, he hesitated, then reached out slowly to touch her cheek with calloused fingers. Choose to care when should have stayed cold. Clara's breath caught at his touch, gentle as a whisper against her skin. And now? She asked, hardly daring to breathe. Now that your mission is complete, your name cleared, what happens now? Samuel glanced toward the meadow where his people had made camp. Must help them settle, he said softly. Guide them home. It is duty. He turned back to Clara, his eyes holding hers. But then, the word hung between them, filled with possibility. Clara waited, her heart pounding in her chest. Then would return, Samuel continued, his voice low and earnest. If welcome, if place for me here, not as worker, not as government man, as He struggled for the right word, as partner. Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks, unable to hold them back any longer. "There will always be a place for you here," she whispered. "Always." Samuel's hand gently wiped away her tears, his touch reverent. For a moment, they stood suspended in time, the soft glow of sunset wrapping them in golden light. Then, with infinite tenderness, Samuel leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss as gentle as the brush of a butterfly's wing, yet carrying the weight of promise. When they parted, Clara felt as if something within her had shifted, a door long closed now standing open. The future stretched before them, uncertain but bright with possibility. "I should check on the families," Samuel said softly, reluctant to break the moment. "They are afraid even now." Clara nodded, understanding. "Go, I'll bring food to the children." As Samuel walked toward the camp, Clara watched him go, this man who had entered her life like a storm, disruptive, powerful, and ultimately life-giving. The land around her seemed to pulse with renewed vitality, as if it too sensed the change that had come. She was about to turn toward the house when a flicker of movement caught her eye. On the distant ridge where Morrison's men had watched the night before, a lone rider sat motionless against the darkening sky. Even at this distance, Clara recognized the straight-backed posture of Jim Harmon. He had not been arrested with Morrison having turned state's evidence at the last moment. A chill ran down Clara's spine as the rider raised an arm in what might have been a salute or a threat. Then he wheeled his horse and disappeared over the ridge, leaving Clara with the unsettling certainty that while one battle had been won, the war was far from over. As darkness fell over Dry Creek Valley, Clara lit the lamps in her house, their warm glow a beacon in the gathering night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she allowed herself to savor this moment of victory, of connection, of hope. Reborn. In the meadow, Samuel's people sang songs of gratitude around their fires, their voices rising and falling like the wind through prairie grass. And for the first time since Jacob's death, Clara's house felt like a home again, not just walls and a roof, but a sanctuary, a place of belonging. She stepped back onto the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast western sky. Somewhere out there, Morrison was sitting in a jail cell, his empire crumbling. The railroad would still come, bringing change that would transform the valley forever. But tonight, in this moment of hard-won peace, Clara allowed herself to believe in a future where justice might prevail, where hearts might change, and where love might grow in the most unlikely of places. A soft footfall behind her announced Samuel's return. He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching, both gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Beautiful night," Clara murmured. "Beautiful woman," Samuel replied softly. Clara turned to him, a smile playing at her lips. "Are all Army Scouts so forward, Mr. Tallbear? Only ones who find treasure greater than gold." He answered, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight. As they stood together on the porch of the house they had defended, surrounded by the land they both loved, Clara felt the final walls around her heart begin to crumble. The path ahead might be uncertain, fraught with challenges, both known and unforeseen, but for the first time in 3 long years, she was ready to walk it not alone, but side by side with this remarkable man who had shown her the true meaning of courage, dignity, and hope. The night deepened around them, but in Clara's heart, a new day had already begun. The morning after Morrison's arrest dawned clear and bright, the September sun casting long shadows across Clara's ranch. She stood on the porch, watching as the Native American families broke camp, preparing for the final leg of their journey to the reservation lands to the north. Children darted between wagons, their laughter carrying on the crisp morning air, while the adults worked with practiced efficiency, their movements speaking of lives spent in constant motion. Samuel moved among them, speaking in his native tongue, his deep voice rising and falling in cadences unfamiliar to Clara's ears. He looked different today, more assured, more commanding. The previous evening he had explained his role to her more fully, not just a scout, but a liaison between his people and the army working to document and rectify the land thefts that had displaced so many families. "You're good with them," Clara said when he finally approached the porch. "They trust you." Samuel nodded, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "They know I fight for them, even when wearing white man's uniform." He gazed thoughtfully at the families. Many lost everything. Homes burned, livestock taken. Start again now with little help. "But they have you," Clara said softly. Samuel's dark eyes met hers. "And you have helped them too. Food, water, safe place to rest. They will remember Widow Whitford." Clara smiled at the formal title. After last night's kiss, Widow Whitford seemed an increasingly inadequate description of who she was becoming. "When will you leave?" she asked the question that had been weighing on her mind since dawn. "Tomorrow," Samuel replied. "Must reach reservation before first snow. Show families where to build help start lodges." He hesitated, then added quietly, 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then return if still welcome." "You'll always be welcome here," Clara assured him, her hand reaching out to touch his arm, the simple contact sending warmth through her despite the morning chill. Their moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Clara tensed instinctively, but Samuel remained calm, his eyes fixed on the road. "Sheriff," he said, identifying the rider before Clara could make out who it was. "And Judge Harrison." Sure enough, Sheriff McKenna rode into view, accompanied by a distinguished-looking older man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Behind them came Tom Bradley, looking excited, and to Clara's surprise, Jim Harmon, his expression unreadable. "Morning, Mrs. Whitford Tallbear," McKenna called as they approached. "Hope we're not interrupting your breakfast." "Not at all, dear Sheriff," Clara replied, setting down her coffee cup. "What brings you out so early?" The riders dismounted, and McKenna made the introductions. "This here's Judge Harrison, circuit judge for the territory. He rode in last night after hearing about Morrison's arrest." Judge Harrison stepped forward, removing his hat. "Mrs. Whitford, a pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under more pleasant circumstances. Mr. Tallbear Captain Hollister speaks very highly of your service." Samuel inclined his head respectfully. "Judge, I've come to inform you both that Dale Morrison has been formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and assault," Harrison continued. "Given the evidence, I expect he'll be bound over for trial in the territorial court next month." "That's good news," Clara said, though she couldn't help noticing Jim Harmon's shifting gaze. "But I don't understand why Mr. Harmon is here." Harmon stepped forward, hat in hands, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Whitford, I've come to make things right. Or try to, anyway." "Jim's turned state's evidence against Morrison," McKenna explained, "in exchange for leniency regarding his own involvement." "I was wrong," Harmon said, his voice rough with emotion. "About you, about Mr. Tallbear. Morrison. He had a hold on a lot of us. Knew things, threatened things." He glanced at Judge Harrison, who nodded encouragingly. "But that's no excuse for what I did. Setting fire to your barn, helping spread lies about you in town." Clara studied the man before her, a hard-working rancher who had allowed himself to become Morrison's tool. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, Mr. Harmon," she said finally. "I appreciate that." "There's more," Harmon continued. Morrison wasn't working alone. He had partners investors from back east funding his land grabs. They were planning to buy up the whole valley before the railroad announcement went public. Judge Harrison nodded gravely. We've seized documents from Morrison's office that confirm this. The conspiracy appears to reach quite high, possibly even to territorial officials. But that's not why we're here, Sheriff McKenna interjected. Jim has something else to tell you. Something about Pete. Harmon's face darkened. My brother didn't take his arrest well. He was drunk last night, talking wild in his cell. Said Morrison had promised him a piece of the railroad money if he paused, clearly uncomfortable. If he made sure you were taken care of, if Morrison's other plans failed. Clara felt a chill run through her. Are you saying your brother planned to kill me? Not just you, Harmon said grimly, his eyes flicking to Samuel. Both of you. And he's not in his cell anymore. Broke out sometime before dawn. We've got men searching, McKenna added quickly, seeing the alarm on Clara's face. But I wanted to warn you personally. Pete's dangerous when he's drinking, and he blames you for everything that's happened. Samuel had gone very still, his eyes scanning the surrounding landscape with new intensity. You see Ryder on Ridge last night? He asked Clara softly. She nodded, remembering the silhouette against the sunset. I thought it was Jim. Was Pete, Samuel said with certainty. Watching, planning. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitford, under the circumstances, I'd strongly advise you to consider staying in town until Pete Harmon is apprehended. The sheriff can provide protection. No, Clara interrupted firmly. This is my home. I won't be driven from it by fear. Clara? Samuel began, concern evident in his voice. No, she repeated, meeting his gaze steadily. We've stood our ground against worse odds. I won't run now. Samuel studied her for a long moment, then nodded, a mixture of resignation and admiration in his eyes. Then we prepare. Make house safe. I'll leave Deputy Wilson with you, McKenna offered. He's young, but he's a good shot. And I'll stay too, Jim Harmon volunteered, surprising everyone. Pete's my brother, my responsibility. And I know how he thinks, where he might hide. Clara hesitated, unsure whether to trust the man who had so recently been her enemy. But there was genuine remorse in Harmon's eyes, and they needed all the help they could get. Thank you, she said finally. Both of you. As the men discussed security arrangements, Clara found herself gazing out at the Native American families preparing to depart. They had survived displacement, violence, and betrayal, yet here they were rebuilding their lives with dignity and determination. Their resilience strengthened her own resolve. The day passed in tense preparation. Deputy Wilson arrived, a fresh-faced young man barely out of his teens, but serious about his duties. The Native American families delayed their departure at Samuel's request, the men offering to help strengthen the ranch's defenses. By sunset, the house had been transformed into a small fortress, windows, boarded sightlines, cleared escape routes established. As darkness fell, Clara found herself in the kitchen with Samuel preparing food for those who would stand watch through the night. The domesticity of the task felt strangely comforting amidst the preparations for violence. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, setting down the knife she'd been using to slice bread. Samuel looked up from the coffee he was brewing. For what? For bringing this danger to your people. Clara gestured toward the window where the families had made camp once more. They've suffered enough without being drawn into my troubles. Samuel's expression softened. Not your trouble, our trouble. And my people understand standing together against threats. He moved closer, his presence warm and solid in the lamplight. Besides, They see what I see." "And what's that?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Woman worth fighting for," Samuel replied, simply, his dark eyes holding hers. "Woman who stands for what is right when others turn away. Woman with fierce heart." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, still unaccustomed to such direct admiration. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." "No." Samuel shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "What anyone should do and what they do, very different. You taught me this." Before Clara could respond, a sharp whistle came from outside the signal they had arranged with Deputy Wilson to indicate approaching riders. Samuel immediately moved to the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the boards. "Two riders," he reported, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Moving slow, trying to stay hidden." Clara reached for Jacob's rifle, which now stood ready by the door. "Deputy Wilson. In position by barn. Jim watching back of house." Samuel checked his own weapon, a Army-issue revolver Captain Hollister had returned to him. "You stay here. I check upstairs window for better view." "Be careful," Clara urged, her heart pounding, as Samuel slipped silently from the room. Alone in the kitchen, Clara doused the lamp, allowing her eyes to adjust to the darkness. Through the window, she could see the faint glow of campfires from where the Native American families had gathered, purposely visible as a deterrent. Deputy Wilson was hidden in the shadows of the barn, while Jim Harmon patrolled the back of the property. Minutes stretched like hours as Clara waited, straining to hear any sound above the beating of her own heart. Then a soft creak on the porch, someone testing the front step. Clara raised her rifle, aiming at the door, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. The handle turned slowly, testing. Clara had barred the door from the inside, but she knew a determined man could break it down. She steadied her breathing, remembering Jacob's instructions from years ago. Aim, center, squeeze, don't pull, and never hesitate. A shadow passed by the window, and Clara shifted her aim. The boards they had nailed over the glass would slow an intruder, but not stop a determined one. A soft whistle came from upstairs. Samuel signaled that he had spotted something. 3 short notes, danger close. Suddenly, the night erupted in gunfire. A shot splintered the boards over the window, sending wooden shards flying. Clara ducked instinctively, then returned fire toward the muzzle flash she had glimpsed. More shots rang out from the direction of the barn, Deputy Wilson engaging another attacker. "Pete," Jim Harmon's voice called from outside. "It's over. Throw down your gun." A harsh laugh answered him. "Nothing's over, brother. Not while that Indian-loving witch still breathes." More shots. The sound of breaking glass upstairs. Then a heavy thud. Clara's blood ran cold. Had Samuel been hit? She wanted to call out to rush upstairs, but discipline kept her in position, covering the downstairs entry points. Through the chaos, Clara became aware of a new sound, a faint crackling, accompanied by the acrid smell of smoke. With horror, she realized Pete's plan. He wasn't trying to shoot his way in. He was going to burn them out. "Fire!" she shouted, hoping Samuel could hear her. He set fire to the house. The smoke was thickening now, seeping through cracks in the boards over the windows. Clara could see the orange glow of flames licking at the porch. She had to move, had to find another way out. Keeping low, she made her way toward the back door, still clutching her rifle. The smoke was less dense here, but she could hear the fire spreading rapidly, hungrily consuming the dry wooden siding of her home. "Samuel," she called, coughing, as smoke began to fill the house. "Samuel, where are you?" No answer came from upstairs. Fear clutched at Clara's heart. Had he been shot, overcome by smoke? She had to find him, had to get him out. Just as she turned toward the stairs, the back door burst open. Clara raised her rifle, then lowered it immediately as she recognized Jim Harmon. "Mrs. Whitford! This way!" he shouted, extending his hand. "The whole front of the house is ablaze." "Samuel's upstairs!" Clara cried, resisting his pull. "I can't leave him." "I'll find him," Harmon promised. "But you need to get clear first, please." Reluctantly, Clara allowed Harmon to guide her outside. The night air was blissfully cool after the smoke-filled house, but the relief was short-lived as she turned to see flames engulfing the front of her home. The fire had spread with terrifying speed, fed by the dry wood and the slight breeze. "Samuel!" she screamed, trying to pull away from Harmon's restraining grip. "Samuel! Stay here!" Harmon ordered, pushing her toward the relative safety of the well. "I'll go back for him." Before he could move, a shot rang out from the darkness. Harmon staggered, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "Jim!" Clara gasped, catching him as he stumbled. "Pete!" Harmon gasped, pain etched on his face. "He's still out there." Clara helped Harmon to shelter behind the well's stone wall, then turned back toward the burning house, desperation, overwhelming caution. She had to find Samuel, had to get him out before the whole structure collapsed. "Clara, no," Harmon called weakly after her. She ignored him, running toward the back door, which was still relatively clear of flames. Just as she reached it, a figure emerged from the smoke-filled interior, staggering under the weight of another man. "Samuel!" Clara cried, rushing forward to help. Together, they dragged Deputy Wilson away from the burning building. The young man was unconscious, a bloody gash across his temple, but breathing steadily. "Found upstairs," Samuel explained between coughs, his face streaked with soot. "Hit from behind, not shot." "Are you hurt?" Clara demanded, her hands searching Samuel for injuries even as relief flooded through her. "No," he assured her. "But fire spreads fast. House." He glanced back at the inferno that had been Clara's home, regret in his eyes. "House cannot save." Clara followed his gaze, watching as flames consumed the place where she had lived with Jacob, where she had begun to rebuild her life, where she and Samuel had shared their first kiss. All of it burning to ash before her eyes. "It's just a house," she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. "We're alive. That's what matters." A sharp laugh cut through the crackle of the flames. "Not for long." Clara and Samuel whirled to see Pete Harmon emerging from the shadows, a rifle aimed squarely at them. His face was twisted with hatred, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "You ruined everything," he snarled. "Morrison promised us a fortune when the railroad came through. And you," he spat toward Samuel, "you and your kind should have been wiped out years ago." "Pete, don't," Jim Harmon called weakly from behind the well. "It's over. Morrison lied to all of us." "Shut up, Jim," Pete snapped, not taking his eyes off Clara and Samuel. "You always were too soft, too willing to be pushed around." He raised his rifle. "Well, I'm finishing what Morrison started. This valley belongs to men like us, not Indian-loving women and government pets." Clara felt Samuel tense beside her, ready to move to protect her. But she knew Pete would fire at the first sign of movement. They were trapped, caught in the open, with a madman's finger on the trigger. "You're going to murder us in cold blood?" Clara asked, playing for time, hoping for an opening. "In front of witnesses. You'll hang Pete." Harmon's face twisted into a grotesque smile. "Who's to say you didn't die in the fire? Tragic accident. And if a few Indians go missing in the confusion, who's gonna care?" Clara saw his finger tighten on the trigger and closed her eyes, bracing for the impact she knew would come. Instead, she heard a different sound, the distinctive crack of a rifle shot from behind Pete Harmon. Pete's eyes widened in surprise. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then back up at Clara and Samuel, confusion replacing hatred. His rifle slipped from nerveless fingers as he crumpled to the ground. From the shadows beyond emerged Captain Hollister, rifle still raised. Behind him stood several of his Indian scouts, weapons at the ready. "Mrs. Whitford, Mr. Tallbear," the captain acknowledged grimly. "We came as soon as we spotted the fire." Clara rushed to Jim Harmon's side, tearing strips from her petticoat to bind his wounded shoulder. "He needs a doctor," she told the captain. "And Deputy Wilson's been injured too." "My men will care for them," Hollister assured her, gesturing to two scouts who immediately moved to assist. "Are either of you hurt?" Clara shook her head, still dazed by their narrow escape. "No, but my house." All eyes turned to the burning structure. The roof had collapsed now, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. The heat was intense, driving them further back. There would be nothing left by morning but ashes and memories. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitford," Captain Hollister said quietly. "It's too far gone to save." Clara felt Samuel's arm slip around her shoulders, steadying her as she watched her past burn away. She leaned into his strength, grateful for his solid presence in a world that seemed to be crumbling around her. "The families?" Samuel asked, concern evident in his voice. "They are safe, all accounted for," Hollister confirmed. "They're the ones who alerted us to the fire. Brave people, they were preparing to come to your aid when we arrived." Clara thought of the native families who had already lost so much, ready to risk themselves for her sake. The realization humbled her, deepening her respect for these people she had only just begun to know. "Thank them for me," she said softly. "For everything." As the night wore on, more help arrived from town. Doc Bradley came to tend to the wounded while others brought blankets, food, and offers of shelter. Clara sat wrapped in a quilt on the back of a wagon, watching as the remnants of her home smoldered in the pre-dawn light. Beside her, Samuel stood silent vigil, his face unreadable in the fading darkness. "You should go with the families," Clara said, finally breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "They need you now more than I do." Samuel turned to her, surprise evident in his eyes. "You want me to go?" "No," Clara admitted, her voice catching. "I want you to stay. But that's selfish. Your people need guidance to rebuild their homes before winter comes. I'll be all right." Samuel crouched before her, taking her hands in his. "Clara Whitford," he said, his dark eyes serious in the growing light. "I made promise to help my people, yes, but also to return to you. Both promises I keep. But where will I be when you return?" Clara gestured helplessly at the ruins of her home. "Everything's gone, Samuel. The house, the barn, even Jacob's tools. I have nothing left to rebuild with, and Morrison made sure the bank won't loan me a penny." "Not nothing," Samuel countered gently. "Land remains. Friends remain." He touched her cheek, his calloused fingers tender against her skin. "Heart remains." Clara leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his unwavering faith. "I don't know if that's enough." "Mrs. Whitford." They both looked up to see Tom Bradley approaching, his young face solemn in the growing light. "Pa sent me to tell you we've made arrangements. The Olsons have offered their spare room for as long as you need it, and folks in town are already talking about helping rebuild come spring." Clara was momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness from a community that had so recently shunned her. "That's very generous," she managed finally. "Please thank them for me." Tom nodded, then added hesitantly, "There's something else. The railroad survey crew arrived in town last night. Their boss, Mr. Simmons, he's asking to speak with you. Says it's important." Clara exchanged a glance with Samuel, who looked equally puzzled. With me, why? Something about land rights and right-of-way permissions, Tom explained. Pa says he seems eager to make a deal, especially now that Morrison's out of the picture. A railroad deal could mean a fresh start money to rebuild security for the future. But it would also mean change, irreversible change, for the valley, for the land she loved. Tell Mr. Simmons I'll speak with him tomorrow, Clara decided. Today I need to. She looked back at the smoldering ruins of her home to say goodbye. Tom nodded understandingly and retreated, leaving Clara and Samuel alone once more. "What will you do?" Samuel asked quietly. Clara gazed out at her land, still beautiful, despite the tragedy that had unfolded upon it. The morning sun now gilded the distant mountains, promising a new day, a new beginning. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But whatever I decide, it won't be out of fear or desperation. I won't let men like Morrison or Pete Harmon dictate my future, even from beyond the grave." Samuel smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "Fierce heart," he said softly, echoing his earlier words. "This is why I return." Later that morning, as Clara sorted through the few possessions rescued from the fire, Captain Hollister approached. The Native American families were preparing to depart once more. Wagons loaded, children gathered. The brief respite ended. "Mrs. Whitford," the captain began formally, "on behalf of the United States Army, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the hardship you've endured as a result of Mr. Tolbear's mission. The government recognizes its responsibility in this matter." Clara looked up from the charred remains of Jacob's photograph, the only item she had managed to salvage from the mantelpiece. "What are you saying, Captain?" "I'm saying, ma'am, that there will be compensation for your losses, for your assistance to these families, and for your courage in standing against corruption." He handed her an official-looking document. "This is a preliminary assessment. The final amount will be determined after a full investigation, but it should be sufficient to rebuild your home and more." Clara stared at the figure written on the paper, hardly believing her eyes. It was more money than she had ever possessed enough to rebuild the ranch 10 times over. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why would the government care about one small ranch in Wyoming territory? Because without your actions, Mrs. Whitford, a massive land fraud scheme would have continued unchecked," Hollister explained. "The corruption extended to territorial officials, possibly even to Washington. Your stand and Mr. Tolbear's evidence has exposed a conspiracy that threatened the very integrity of the frontier settlement system." Clara glanced toward Samuel, who was helping load the last wagons, unaware of this conversation. "Does he know about this? The compensation?" "No, ma'am," Hollister admitted. "Mr. Tolbear has steadfastly refused any personal reward, says he was only doing his duty." The captain smiled slightly. "Stubborn man, you're Mr. Tolbear." "He's not my Mr. Tolbear," Clara protested automatically, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but I've seen the way he looks at you," Hollister said gently. "And the way you look at him. In my experience, there are some bonds that transcend the usual conventions." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but couldn't deny the truth in his words. "It's complicated, Captain." "Life usually is, Mrs. Whitford." Hollister replaced his hat, preparing to leave. "The families are ready to depart. We should reach the reservation in 3 days, if the weather holds." Clara nodded, suddenly acutely aware that Samuel would be leaving with them. For how long? 2 weeks, he had said. Maybe 3. It seemed an eternity. "Captain," she called as Hollister turned to go. "Take care of him, please." Hollister's eyes softened. "I will, ma'am. Though between you and me, Samuel Tolbear is quite capable of taking care of himself." and others. He tipped his hat. "Good day, Mrs. Whitford." Clara watched him walk away, then turned her attention back to the document in her hands. Financial security, a chance to rebuild, to start fresh. It was more than she had dared hope for just hours ago. Yet the prospect filled her with uncertainty rather than joy. What should she rebuild? The same modest ranch that had been her home with Jacob. Something grander befitting her new circumstances, or something different entirely. A home that looked toward the future rather than preserving the past. And what of the railroad? Their offer, whatever it might be, could change everything. The peaceful valley transformed by iron tracks, steam engines, the ceaseless march of progress. Was that what she wanted for her land? For herself? These questions swirled in her mind as she made her way toward the departing wagons. Samuel stood waiting for her, his few possessions packed, his face composed, but eyes revealing the conflict within. "So," Clara said, attempting lightness despite the heaviness in her heart. "You're leaving." "For now," Samuel confirmed. "Must see families settled, help build lodges before snow comes." He hesitated, then added softly, "But thoughts stay here with you." Clara blinked back tears. "I'll hold you to your promise to return," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "2 weeks, you said." "At most," Samuel assured her. "Less, if possible." An awkward silence fell between them both, aware of the watching eyes. The conventions they had already defied the uncertain future stretching before them. "Samuel," Clara began, not sure what she wanted to say, but needing to say something before he left. He silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. "No goodbyes," he said firmly. "Only until we meet again." Then, to the scandalized gasps of several onlookers and the knowing smiles of others, Samuel drew Clara into his arms and kissed her, not the gentle, tentative kiss of the night before, but a full, passionate claiming that left no doubt about his intentions or his heart. When they finally parted, Clara was breathless, her cheeks flushed, her heart pounding. Samuel's eyes held hers dark and intense, a silent promise in their depths. 2 weeks, he repeated, his voice husky. "I'll be waiting," Clara whispered. With a final nod, Samuel mounted his horse and rode to the head of the wagon train. He didn't look back as they departed, and Clara was grateful for that small mercy. It allowed her to maintain her composure as she watched him ride away, leading his people toward a new beginning. Only when the last wagon had disappeared over the ridge did Clara allow her tears to fall. Not tears of despair, but of release. The past was truly gone, now burned away with her home, departed with the man who had awakened her heart. The future stretched before her, uncertain but full of possibility. She turned to face the ruins of her ranch, the land that had been her sanctuary and her prison for 3 long years. For the first time, she looked at it not through the lens of grief and obligation, but with new eyes, seeing not what had been lost, but what might yet be built. "I'll be here when you return, Samuel Tallbear," she whispered to the wind, "and we'll build something new together, something worthy of both our dreams." With that promise in her heart, Clara Whitford squared her shoulders and began the long walk toward town, toward temporary shelter, toward the first steps of a new journey. Behind her, the ashes of her old life cooled in the autumn air, while ahead, the future beckoned with both challenge and hope. The Olsons' home was modest but welcoming, a weathered farmhouse that smelled of fresh bread and clean linen. Ingrid had prepared the spare room with obvious care, fresh flowers on the windowsill, the best quilt on the bed, a small desk positioned to catch the morning light. "You stay as long as needed," the older woman insisted, her accent thickening with emotion. "This home is your home now." Clara was overwhelmed by such generosity. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," Lars said, gruffly uncomfortable with emotional displays. "Neighbors help neighbors," is way of things here. That evening, as Clara sat at the Olsons' kitchen table with a cup of Ingrid's strong coffee, a knock came at the door. Lars opened it to reveal Tom Bradley and his father, along with several other townspeople Clara recognized. "Evening, Lars," Doc Bradley said, removing his hat. "Hope we're not intruding. We've come to speak with Mrs. Whitford." Clara rose, suddenly wary. Despite the kindness shown by some, she hadn't forgotten how quickly the town had turned against her when Morrison stirred up hatred. "Doctor," she acknowledged cautiously. "Gentlemen," Doc Bradley stepped forward, his weathered face grave. "Mrs. Whitford, first let me say how deeply sorry we all are for what happened. Not just the fire, but the way this community treated you. It was shameful, and there's no excuse for it." Murmurs of agreement came from the men behind him. Clara recognized Paul Garrett, the blacksmith Samuel Turner, and several others who had been part of Morrison's Citizens Committee just days before. "We've come to make amends, if we can," Bradley continued, "to offer our help in rebuilding your ranch when you're ready. And to let you know that Jim Harmon's going to pull through," Paul Garrett added. "He's been asking after you, ma'am. Seems right torn up about everything." Clara wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected show of support. "That's very kind of you all," she managed finally, "though I haven't decided yet what I'll do about rebuilding." "There's something else," Doc Bradley said, gesturing to Tom, who produced a thick envelope. "Judge Harrison left this for you before he returned to Cheyenne. Said it was important." Clara accepted the envelope with a questioning look. "Did he say what it contained?" "Only that it pertained to your land rights and Morrison's fraud," Bradley replied, "and that you should read it before meeting with the railroad man, Simmons." After the men had gone, Clara opened the envelope at the Olsons' kitchen table. Inside were legal documents, many pages of dense text, official seals and signatures. As she read through them, her eyes widened in astonishment. "What is it?" Ingrid asked, setting a fresh pot of coffee on the table. "It's about my land," Clara said slowly, still processing the information. "According to this, Morrison's tampering with my mortgage was just the beginning. He falsified survey boundaries, bribed officials to change water rights allocations." She looked up, stunned. "The eastern section of his ranch, the part bordering my property, it legally belongs to me. Has all along." Lars leaned over to examine the documents, his farmer's hands incongruous against the official papers. "Government say this true, your land. Judge Harrison has certified it," Clara confirmed, pointing to the official seal. "And there's more. The water rights for the entire Eastern Valley were originally granted to Jacob. Morrison manipulated the records after his death, taking advantage of my ignorance." The implications were staggering. With the additional land and water rights, Clara's modest ranch was suddenly one of the most valuable properties in the valley, especially with the railroad coming through. "This changes everything," she murmured more to herself than to the Olsons. "I need to think, to plan." Later that night, unable to sleep in the unfamiliar room, Clara sat by the window staring out at the star-filled sky. Somewhere to the north, Samuel was making camp with his people, perhaps looking up at these same stars. The thought comforted her, creating a connection across the miles that separated them. The documents from Judge Harrison lay on the small desk, their significance still sinking in. Power had shifted suddenly and dramatically. Where once Clara had been fighting desperately to hold on to her modest ranch, now she controlled resources that others would covet: land, water, and the crucial right-of-way the railroad needed. "What would you do, Jacob?" she whispered to the night. But for the first time the question felt hollow, perfunctory. Jacob was gone, had been gone for 3 years. His dreams for the ranch, for their life together, had died with him. Now Clara had new dreams forming, shaped by her own experiences, her own strength discovered through adversity, and yes, by her growing feelings for a man who defied all the conventions she had been raised to respect. "What will I do?" She amended the question, feeling more honest, more true to who she was becoming. The answer didn't come immediately, but as she watched the stars wheel slowly overhead, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever she decided, it would be her choice, not dictated by Morrison's threats, not limited by poverty or fear, not even defined by Jacob's memory or Samuel's expectations. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Clara Whitford was truly free to determine her own path. The meeting with the railroad representative, Mr. Simmons, took place the next morning in Doc Bradley's parlor. Clara had dressed carefully in her one remaining good dress, her hair neatly arranged, her demeanor composed despite the turmoil of the past days. Simmons was a surprise, not the hard-eyed businessman she had expected, but a scholarly-looking man in his 50s with wire-rimmed spectacles and a thoughtful manner. He rose when Clara entered, offering a courteous bow. "Mrs. Whitford, a pleasure to meet you, though I deeply regret the circumstances. Please accept my condolences for your recent losses." Clara inclined her head, taking the seat he offered. "Thank you, Mr. Simmons. I understand you wish to discuss the railroad's plans for Dry Creek Valley." "Indeed." Simmons opened a leather portfolio revealing detailed maps of the valley. "As you may know, the Transcontinental Extension has been surveying potential routes for a new spur line connecting Cheyenne to the mining regions to the north. After extensive evaluation, our engineers have determined that Dry Creek Valley offers the optimal path." He pointed to a line drawn in red ink across the map, a line that cut directly through Clara's property, including the newly confirmed eastern section. "I see," Clara said neutrally, giving nothing away, "and you require my permission for this right-of-way." "Indeed," Simmons confirmed. "The railroad is prepared to make a generous offer for the necessary land easements." He named a figure that would have seemed astronomical to Clara just days ago. Now, with the government compensation promised by Captain Hollister, it merely seemed fair. "That's an interesting proposal," Clara said carefully. "However, I'm curious about something, Mr. Simmons. This route passes through what was previously considered Morrison's land that has now been legally confirmed as mine. Were you aware of this recent development?" Simmons's expression revealed his surprise. "I was not, Mrs. Whitford. Our negotiations had been primarily with Mr. Morrison, who assured us he controlled all the necessary properties." "I imagine he did," Clara said dryly. "Mr. Morrison had a habit of making promises based on resources he didn't actually control." "This does complicate matters," Simmons admitted, removing his spectacles to polish them thoughtfully. "Though I'm authorized to negotiate with whomever legally owns the required right-of-way." "And if I were to refuse?" Clara asked, curious rather than confrontational. "If I didn't want a railroad cutting through my land?" Simmons replaced his spectacles, regarding her seriously. "That would be your right, Mrs. Whitford. The railroad cannot legally compel access without your consent. However, I should note that we would simply seek an alternative route, perhaps through the Western Valley, bypassing Dry Creek entirely." The implication was clear. Without the railroad, Dry Creek would remain an isolated backwater, missing the economic boom that inevitably followed the iron tracks. It wasn't a threat, merely a statement of reality. Clara studied the map, tracing the proposed route with her finger. The line cut through her eastern pastures well away from where her house had stood. With proper planning, the ranch could coexist with the railroad, perhaps even benefit from it. "I'm not prepared to make a decision today, Mr. Simmons," she said finally. "There are factors I need to consider first, people I need to consult." "Of course," Simmons agreed readily. "These are significant decisions that shouldn't be rushed." He gathered his maps, returning them to his portfolio. "I'll be in Dry Creek for another week, conducting additional surveys. Please feel free to call on me at the hotel when you're ready to continue our discussion." After Simmons departed, Clara remained in Doc Bradley's parlor, contemplating the opportunity before her. The railroad would change everything, bringing prosperity to some, disruption to others. The peaceful valley she had known would be transformed forever. Was that what she wanted? Was that what Samuel would want for the land he too had come to love? And what of the Native American families heading to the reservation lands? How would the railroad affect their fragile new beginning? These questions accompanied Clara through the days that followed as she settled into temporary life at the Olsons' farm. She visited her burned-out ranch daily, sifting through the ashes for salvageable items, marking the boundaries of her newly expanded property, and most importantly, thinking about the past, the present, and the future she might build from the ruins of her old life. One week after the fire, as Clara stood on the hill overlooking what remained of her home, she was startled by the approach of a rider, Jim Harmon, his arm still in a sling, his face haggard but determined. "Mrs. Whitford," he greeted her, dismounting awkwardly with his injured arm. "Doc said I'd find you here." Clara nodded cautiously. Though Harmon had proven his change of heart by standing with them against his brother, trust came slowly after betrayal. "Should you be riding with that shoulder, Mr. Harmon?" "Probably not," he admitted with a grimace, "but I needed to see you to say some things face to face." "I'm listening," Clara said, neither warm nor cold, simply waiting. Harmon removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "First, I want to apologize again for everything. The fire in your barn, the lies I helped spread standing with Morrison against you." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "There's no excuse for it. I was weak, let myself be used, because I was afraid of Morrison's influence." "Your brother paid a high price for that influence," Clara observed quietly. Harmon's face twisted with grief. "Pete was always wild, always angry at the world. Morrison knew how to use that same as he used my weakness." He sighed heavily. "I keep thinking maybe if I'd stood up to them sooner, things would have turned out different." "Perhaps," Clara acknowledged. "But dwelling on what might have been is a path to madness, Mr. Harmon. Believe me, I know." Harmon nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "There's something else," he continued. "I've been thinking about what happens next. My ranch isn't much, couple 100 acres, mostly scrub. But it's paid for, and it's adjacent to your new eastern boundary." Clara frowned, not following his train of thought. "What are you suggesting?" "I want to sell it to you," Harmon said simply. "At a fair price. Combined with what you already own, it would give you control of the entire eastern watershed. That's valuable with the railroad coming." Clara was taken aback by the unexpected offer. "Why would you sell your ranch?" "It's your livelihood." Harmon looked away, his expression pained. "Too many ghosts now. Pete may have turned bad, but he was still my brother. Can't see myself staying knowing what happened." He hesitated, then added quietly, "And I figure I owe you something after what we did to your place." Clara considered the offer, seeing both the practical advantages and the complex emotions behind it. "I appreciate the gesture, Mr. Harmon, but I don't want your ranch out of guilt or obligation." "It's a business decision, too," Harmon insisted. "Your land with mine makes sense, especially with the water rights. And I hear the government's compensating you handsomely for your trouble. You could afford it." News traveled fast in a small community like Dry Creek. Clara wasn't surprised that her financial situation was already common knowledge. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But I won't make any decisions until—" She stopped herself, aware of how it would sound. "Until Tallbear returns," Harmon finished for her, no judgment in his voice. "I figured as much. Just wanted you to know the offer's there." He replaced his hat, preparing to leave. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Whitford, I think you two make a good match. Different as can be on the outside, but cut from the same cloth where it counts." Clara was startled by the unexpected support from such an unlikely source. "Thank you, Mr. Harmon. That's surprisingly kind of you to say." Harmon shrugged his good shoulder. "Near death has a way of clarifying what matters, and it ain't the color of a man's skin, that's for sure." He mounted his horse with some difficulty. "I'll be around when you're ready to talk terms. No hurry." As he rode away, Clara turned her attention back to the burned remains of her home. Where once she had seen only loss, she now began to envision possibilities. A new house, larger and more modern than the old one. Barns and outbuildings positioned to take advantage of the natural contours of the land. Fields and pastures extended across her newly expanded property. And beside her in this vision stood Samuel, his strength and wisdom complementing her determination and resilience. Together, they could build something neither could create, alone, a haven that bridged two worlds, honoring the past while embracing the future. But would he want this? The question nagged at Clara as the days passed, turning into a week, then nearly two. Samuel's promise to return hung in her thoughts like a beacon, but doubts crept in with each passing day. His people needed him. The life of a government scout offered purpose importance. What could she offer to compare with that? These thoughts occupied Clara as she sat on the Olsons' porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Ingrid had gone to bed early with a headache, while Lars was still in the barn, tending to a sick calf. The rhythmic creak of the porch swing was soothing, lulling Clara into a reflective state. So absorbed was she in her thoughts that she almost missed the sound of approaching hoofbeats, a single rider coming fast up the lane. Clara stood shading her eyes against the setting sun. The silhouette was unmistakable even at a distance, the straight-backed posture, the distinctive hat, the fluid way the rider moved with his mount, rather than against it. Her heart leapt, then steadied into a pounding rhythm that sent blood rushing to her cheeks. Samuel had returned earlier than promised, riding as if pursued by demons or drawn by an irresistible force. Clara stepped off the porch, moving to the gate to meet him. As he drew closer, she could see the weariness in his face, the dust of hard travel on his clothes. But his eyes were alight with an emotion that mirrored what she felt in her own heart. Samuel reined in his horse before her, dismounting in one smooth motion. For a long moment, they simply stood looking at each other, drinking in the sight after 2 weeks of separation. "You came back early," Clara finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could not stay away," Samuel replied simply. "Families settled, lodges begun. Others can finish." He took a step closer. "My place is here now, if still welcome." Clara felt tears threatening, but blinked them back. "Always," she assured him, reaching out to touch his arm, needing the physical contact to convince herself he was really there. "But your people understand," Samuel interrupted gently. "Chief Gray Fox say man must follow heart, is way of harmony." His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "My heart led back to you, Clara Whitford." The simple declaration, spoken without artifice or hesitation, broke the last of Clara's reserves. She stepped into Samuel's embrace, her arms encircling his waist, as his folded around her shoulders. "I was afraid you might not come back," she confessed against his chest, inhaling the scent of him, leather and horses, and the indefinable essence that was uniquely Samuel. "Always come back to you," he murmured into her hair. "Always." They stood entwined as the sun slipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the Olsons' yard. Neither seemed willing to be the first to break the embrace, to return to the practical world that awaited them. Finally, the sound of Lars clearing his throat from the barn doorway reminded them they were not alone. They separated reluctantly, though Samuel kept Clara's hand firmly in his, a silent statement of intent. "Tall bear," Lars acknowledged with a nod. "Good you back. Clara been waiting." "Mr. Olson," Samuel replied respectfully. "Thank you for caring for her while I was gone." Lars waved away the thanks. "Is what neighbors do." He eyed their joined hands with a mixture of surprise and acceptance. "You stay for supper. Ingrid makes stew." Before Samuel could answer, Clara spoke up. "Actually, Lars, if it's all right, I'd like to show Samuel the plans I've been working on for rebuilding the ranch." Lars nodded understandingly. "Yeah, of course. I tell Ingrid you eat later." As the older man retreated tactfully into the house, Clara turned to Samuel, suddenly shy despite their emotional reunion. "I have so much to tell you. So much has happened while you were gone." Samuel squeezed her hand gently. "And I listen to all. But first—" He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small leather pouch. "Brought something for you." Clara accepted the pouch curiously. Opening it, she gasped at what lay inside a delicate necklace made of polished stone beads, small pieces of carved bone, and a central pendant of gleaming turquoise set in silver. "Samuel, it's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it carefully from the pouch. "Made by women of my tribe," Samuel explained. "For you. Special meaning, each bead, each carving tells story." He pointed to different elements of the necklace. "This for courage. This for new beginnings. This," he touched the turquoise pendant, "this for union of two hearts across worlds." Clara felt tears well up again, this time flowing freely down her cheeks. "Help me put it on," she asked, turning so Samuel could fasten the necklace around her throat. His fingers were gentle as they brushed her neck, lingering perhaps longer than strictly necessary. When Clara turned back to face him, Samuel's eyes darkened at the sight of his gift against her skin. "Beautiful," he murmured, and Clara knew he meant more than just the necklace. "Come," she said, tugging his hand toward the house. "I have something to show you, too." In the small room the Olsons had provided, Clara had transformed the desk into a workstation, sketches of buildings, maps of her expanded property, and most prominently, detailed plans for a new house, larger and more modern than the one that had burned. "Been busy," Samuel observed, studying the drawings with interest. "I had to keep my mind occupied while you were gone," Clara admitted. "And there's been so much to think about, to plan for." She picked up one of the maps pointing to the newly marked boundaries. "Morrison's fraud was even more extensive than we thought. Judge Harrison has confirmed that a significant portion of the Eastern Valley legally belongs to me. To us," she amended, watching Samuel's face for his reaction. Samuel's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That changes much." "There's more," Clara continued, showing him the railroad survey maps. "The railroad wants to build a spur line through the valley. They've offered to pay for the right-of-way across our land." Samuel studied the map thoughtfully. "Good for town. Brings trade people." "Yes, but it would change everything," Clara pointed out. "The peaceful valley we knew would be transformed." "World always changing," Samuel replied philosophically. Cannot stop river flowing, can only guide where it goes. He looked up from the maps to meet her eyes. What you want, Clara. Not what Jacob would want, not what I want. What you want for future. The question so simply posed yet so profound caught Clara off guard. What did she want? She had been so focused on survival for so long then, on honoring Jacob's memory, that her own desires had become secondary, almost forgotten. I want, she began, then paused, gathering her thoughts. I want to build something lasting. Not just a ranch, but a home. A place where different worlds can meet and find harmony. She touched the necklace at her throat. Like this, each piece unique, but together creating something beautiful. Samuel smiled, understanding, illuminating his dark eyes. And Railroad Jim Harmon's land offer. Clara wasn't surprised that he already knew about Harmon's proposal. News traveled fast on the frontier, and Samuel had undoubtedly heard the latest developments upon his return to town. I think we should accept both, she said decisively. The railroad is coming whether we welcome it or not. Better to have a voice in how it develops than to be left behind. And Harmon's land would give us control of the entire eastern watershed, valuable for the future, especially with the changing climate. Samuel nodded approvingly. Wise thinking, but cost much money. That's another thing I need to tell you, Clara said, retrieving the letter from Captain Hollister. The government has offered compensation for our losses. Significant compensation. As Samuel read the document, his expression shifted from surprise to thoughtfulness. Much money, he said finally. Changes what possible. Yes, Clara agreed. But I wanted to wait for your return before making any decisions. These choices will affect both our futures if... She hesitated suddenly, uncertain, if you still want to build that future together. Samuel set aside the papers, his full attention now focused on Clara. Only thing want more than anything, he said softly, closing the distance between them. Thought of nothing else these past weeks. Building future with you. Clara's heart soared at his words, but a lingering doubt remained. Even if it means settling down, giving up your work with the army, your freedom to move between worlds. Samuel cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. Not giving up, he corrected. Choosing different path. Still help my people reservation, not far. Still use skills, ranch, needs strong hands, knowledge of land. But now, have home, have heart to return to. His thumbs brushed her cheeks tenderly. Have you? The simple declaration dissolved Clara's last reservations. Rising on her tiptoes, she kissed him, not the hesitant kiss of their first embrace, but a kiss of certainty, of commitment, of passion, too long constrained by doubt and convention. Samuel responded in kind, his arms encircling her waist, drawing her against him as if he would never let go. In that moment, past and future merged into a perfect present, a moment of choice, of affirmation, of two paths converging to form a new way forward. When they finally parted, both breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. So, he murmured, a smile in his voice, we build new ranch, new home, new life. Yes, Clara confirmed, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Together. Outside, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the Wyoming sky. Within the small room, plans were spread across the desk, architectural drawings, survey maps, visions of a future yet to be built. But the most important blueprint was written not on paper, but in the hearts of two people who had found in each other the courage to begin again, to transcend the boundaries that divided their worlds, to create something new from the ashes of what had been lost. As darkness fell over Dry Creek Valley, Clara and Samuel stood at the window watching the stars emerge one by one. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, the first steps toward the future they had chosen. But tonight, in this moment of perfect understanding, they allowed themselves to simply be together, united, complete. "Look," Samuel said softly, pointing to a bright star just appearing above the eastern horizon. "First star of evening. My people say it guides lost travelers home." Clara leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, the promise of all the days to come. "Then we're not lost anymore," she whispered. "We're already home." Or toward one of his associates, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and gold-rimmed spectacles. "Mr. Hargrove here, our chief financial officer, has prepared detailed projections of the economic benefits oil development would bring to Dry Creek Valley." Hargrove stepped forward, opening a leather portfolio with a flourish. "Ladies and gentlemen, Western Extraction is prepared to invest over $1 million in this valley over the next 5 years. That means jobs for your sons, contracts for your businesses, and most importantly," he paused for effect, "royalty payments to landowners. Every property owner within 3 miles of a producing well would receive quarterly payments based on production volume." A ripple of interest passed through the crowd. For struggling ranchers still recovering from drought, years such promises held powerful appeal. Clara could see several faces that had been supportive moments ago, now considering these new possibilities with obvious interest. Samuel stood his quiet dignity a stark contrast to the corporate showmanship. "And water?" he asked simply. "What happens to creek when oil contaminates groundwater? What happens to cattle who drink poisoned water? To children?" Bentley stepped forward, his manner patronizing. "These are understandable but outdated concerns. Modern drilling techniques are remarkably safe. Any impact on groundwater would be minimal and temporary, a small price to pay for generational prosperity." "Small price for you," Samuel replied, his voice level but carrying throughout the hall. "Not your water, not your children, not your future." "Mr. Tallbear raises an important point," Doc Bradley interjected, sensing an opportunity to regain momentum. "I'd like to direct a specific question to Mr. Bentley. Are you familiar with the Redfield case in Pennsylvania, where 6 children died from illnesses linked to petroleum contamination of well water?" Bentley's expression flickered momentarily before his professional mask reasserted itself. "I'm not personally familiar with that specific case, Doctor, but I can assure you, I am familiar with it," came a new voice from the doorway. All heads turned to see a tall, thin man with a professorial bearing enter the hall carrying a battered leather satchel. "In fact, I testified as an expert witness in the subsequent lawsuit." Clara felt a surge of hope. "Professor Harrington," she called out, recognizing the man from Captain Hollister's description. The newcomer nodded, making his way through the crowd toward the speaker's table. "James Harrington, Professor of Geology and Hydrology at Columbia University. Captain Hollister telegraphed that my expertise might be of use here." Chambers looked distinctly uncomfortable at this unexpected development. "Professor," he acknowledged stiffly, "this is a community meeting, not a scientific symposium." "On the contrary," Harrington replied mildly, setting his satchel on the table, "when decisions involve potential contamination of groundwater supplies, scientific evidence becomes extremely relevant to community interests." He turned to address the gathered townspeople directly. "I've spent 20 years studying the impact of petroleum extraction on water tables across the country. What Mr. Bentley characterizes as minimal and temporary damage I have documented as catastrophic and permanent in dozens of communities. The professor opened his satchel, extracting several large photographs, which he held up for the audience to see. These images show the impact of oil contamination on farmland in Pennsylvania 3 years after drilling began. Note the dead vegetation, the discolored soil, the absence of wildlife. The stark visual evidence silenced even the most skeptical members of the audience. One photograph in particular drew gasps, a glass jar filled with what should have been clear well water instead, showing a viscous black liquid with an oily sheen. This sample was taken from a family well 2 miles from the nearest drilling site, Harrington explained grimly. The children who drank this water before the contamination became visible developed liver and kidney diseases. 3 died within 18 months. Clara watched as the mood in the hall shifted palpably. The economic promises of Western extraction now stood in stark contrast to these concrete images of environmental devastation. Even those most tempted by royalty payments couldn't ignore the potential consequences so vividly displayed. Chambers attempted to regain control of the narrative. With all due respect, Professor, these photographs represent worst-case scenarios from earlier, less sophisticated drilling operations. Our modern techniques differ only in efficiency, not in fundamental impact, Harrington interrupted firmly. The basic physics and geology remain unchanged. When you drill through a water table to reach petroleum deposits, contamination is not a possibility. It is an inevitability. The only variables are the timing and extent. He turned to the map of Dry Creek Valley displayed on the wall, moving forward to indicate the watershed patterns with a practiced eye. Based on the geological surveys I've reviewed, this valley represents a particularly vulnerable ecosystem. The water table is relatively shallow, and the underground streams that feed your creek system run directly through the petroleum deposits Western extraction hopes to access. Clara could see the impact of these expert observations on the assembled townspeople. Fear was replacing greed in many eyes as the true stakes became clearer. But Western extraction's representatives weren't ready to concede. Even if, and I stress if there were environmental concerns, Hargrove interjected smoothly, the economic benefits far outweigh any temporary disruption. $1 million invested in this community won't matter much when your cattle are dead and your children are sick, Paul Garrett interrupted, rising from his seat. The rancher's weathered face was set in grim lines as he addressed his neighbors directly. Folks, I was tempted by their offers too. $500 in advance royalties seemed mighty appealing after 3 lean years. But what good is money if it costs us the land itself? If it poisons the water that gives life to everything we've built here? A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Clara felt Samuel's hand find hers beneath the table, a silent gesture of solidarity and hope. The tide was turning, but the battle wasn't won yet. Chief Gray Fox rose next, his dignified presence commanding immediate attention. Though he spoke rarely and had remained silent throughout most of the meeting, his words now carried particular weight. My people have lived beside these waters for countless generations, he said, his English precise and formal. We have seen what happens when the earth is wounded for short-term gain. The scars remain long after those who caused them have departed with their profits. He gestured toward the photographs Professor Harrington had displayed. This is not the first time such destruction has been promised as progress. The gold miners said the same. The timber companies said the same. Always they speak of wealth and opportunity. Always they leave poison and ruin behind. The chief turned to face Chambers and his associates directly. You believe you own this land because papers in Cheyenne say so. But the land owns itself. The water flows by its own will. When you poison it, you poison not just this generation, but all who will come after." A profound silence followed these words. Even Western Extraction's representatives seemed momentarily bereft of counter-arguments in the face of such elemental truth. Sheriff McKenna seized the opening. "I think it's time we took a vote," he announced, scanning the room. This meeting was called to gauge community sentiment regarding Western Extraction's proposed drilling operations. "I'm asking for a show of hands those in favor of allowing oil drilling in Dry Creek Valley." A tense moment passed. 3 hands rose hesitantly: Johnson and Perkins, who had already accepted Western Extraction's advance royalties, and a third man Clara didn't immediately recognize. "Those opposed," McKenna continued. The response was overwhelming. Nearly every other hand in the hall rose decisively. Ranchers and farmers, shopkeepers and tradesmen, women and children. A community united in defense of its land and water. "I believe that settles it," McKenna declared with quiet satisfaction. "The people of Dry Creek Valley formally oppose Western Extraction's proposed drilling operations." Chambers's face had hardened into a mask of barely controlled anger. "A charming display of frontier democracy, Sheriff," he said coldly. "Unfortunately for you, all drilling permits are issued by territorial authorities, not local sentiment. While you've been holding your little meeting, our associates in Cheyenne have been finalizing the necessary approvals." He extracted a folded document from his inner pocket, holding it up for all to see. "This telegram arrived this morning. The territorial governor has personally approved our expedited permit application. Construction of the first drilling platform begins tomorrow." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. All their organizing, all their unity rendered apparently meaningless by the stroke of a distant official's pen. Clara felt momentary despair, but Samuel's steady presence beside her prevented it from taking root. "Where?" she asked, her voice cutting through the dismayed reactions. "Where exactly do you plan to begin drilling?" Bentley smiled thinly. "The optimal location, according to our surveys, is at the eastern boundary of your property, Mrs. Whitford, precisely where the underground stream feeding the main creek passes through the richest petroleum deposit. The most vulnerable point in the entire watershed," Professor Harrington observed grimly. "The location guaranteed to cause maximum contamination, when not if leakage occurs." "That's my land," Clara stated firmly. "And I have not granted permission for any drilling." "Your permission is no longer required," Chambers replied with evident satisfaction. "The territorial order includes provisions for eminent domain when resources of critical importance to territorial development are involved. Western Extraction has been granted right of entry, regardless of landowner consent." The revelation sent another shockwave through the assembled community. If territorial authorities could override property rights so completely, none of them were truly secure in their holdings. Doc Bradley rose, his normally gentle demeanor hardened with resolve. "This isn't over, Mr. Chambers. Territorial orders can be challenged in federal court. Eminent domain requires just compensation and due process." "By all means, pursue your legal remedies, Doctor," Chambers replied dismissively. "Our drilling equipment arrives tomorrow. The legal process will take months, if not years. By the time any court ruling is issued, we'll have extracted millions of dollars worth of petroleum, more than enough to compensate Mrs. Whitford generously for any theoretical damages should it come to that." The calculated cruelty of this strategy to destroy the watershed while legal challenges wound their way through distant courts stunned the assembly into momentary silence. Western Extraction had outmaneuvered them at every turn, using political influence, legal technicalities, and the simple reality that corporate wealth could outlast community resistance. It was Samuel who broke the silence, rising to his full height with quiet dignity. "You forget one thing," he said, his voice carrying throughout the now silent hall. "We are still here, on this land, between you and what you want." Chambers's expression shifted from triumph to wariness. "Careful, Mr. Tallbear. That sounds dangerously close to threatening interference with lawful business activities. Such interference would be a criminal offense." "Not threatening," Samuel corrected calmly. "Promising. We will stand between you and destruction of our water, not with violence, with bodies, with witnesses, with truth." Clara understood immediately what he was suggesting. Not armed resistance, which would only play into Western Extraction's hands, but non-violent occupation of the drilling site itself. A human barrier that would force the company to physically remove peaceful protesters before any drilling could begin. "Civil disobedience," Professor Harrington murmured, nodding with growing approval. "Make them show their true colors in full view of the community." Clara stood to join Samuel, their shoulders touching in a visible display of unity. "If you want to drill on my land, Mr. Chambers, you'll have to remove me from it first. And I won't be alone." "Count me in," Paul Garrett declared, standing as well. "And me," Doc Bradley added, rising from his seat. One by one, others throughout the hall stood ranchers and farmers, merchants and craftsmen. Even Sheriff McKenna rose, though his position required careful neutrality. "As sheriff, I can't officially endorse civil disobedience," he stated carefully, "but I can and will ensure that any removal of peaceful protesters from private property is conducted according to strict legal standards. No excessive force, no unnecessary arrests." The implied warning was clear: Western Extraction would not be permitted to use violence or intimidation against the protesters without consequences. Chambers surveyed the room, his confident demeanor faltering slightly as he recognized the depth of community resolve. "This is absurd," he declared. "You can't seriously intend to physically block a legally sanctioned business operation." "Watch us," Clara replied simply. Chief Gray Fox stepped forward, adding his powerful presence to the growing resistance. "My people will join this stand," he announced. "The water that feeds your valley continues to our reservation. Its protection is our cause as well." The Western Extraction contingent conferred briefly, their expressions darkening as they assessed this unexpected development. Finally, Chambers addressed the hall once more, his voice cold with suppressed fury. "Very well. If you insist on this theatrical demonstration, so be it. But understand, this Western Extraction will proceed with its operations as planned. Our equipment and personnel will arrive tomorrow at dawn. If physical obstruction occurs, we are prepared to request territorial militia assistance in enforcing our legal rights." With that final threat hanging in the air, Chambers and his associates departed, their expensive boots echoing on the wooden floor as they strode from the hall. In their wake, the atmosphere transformed from confrontational tension to purposeful determination. Community members gathered around Clara Samuel and the other leaders, offering support and asking how they could help. "We need to organize shifts," Clara suggested, thinking practically. "People can't stand out in the cold indefinitely, teams rotating throughout the day and night." "And supplies," Martha Bradley added. "Food, hot coffee, blankets, firewood for warming stations." "Medical provisions, too," Doc Bradley noted grimly. "I pray they won't be needed, but we should be prepared for all contingencies." As the practical planning accelerated, Clara felt Samuel's hand on her shoulder. She turned to find his dark eyes studying her with a mixture of pride and concern. "This path is dangerous," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Once begun, hard to turn back." "I know," Clara acknowledged, equally quiet. "But what choice do we have? Let them destroy the valley, while we wait for distant courts to maybe eventually rule in our favor." Samuel shook his head. "No choice. Only wanted you to know, understand, I meant what might come." "I understand," Clara assured him, covering his hand with her own. "And I'm ready for whatever comes, as long as we face it together." His expression softened. "Together," he agreed. "Always." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Runners were dispatched to outlying ranches with news of the planned resistance. Supplies were gathered from homes and businesses throughout the town. Wagons were prepared to transport people and provisions to the eastern boundary of Clara's property, where Western Extraction planned to begin drilling. By late afternoon, a remarkable transformation had occurred. A community that had once shunned Clara for taking in a savage was now rallying behind her and Samuel in a unified defense of their shared watershed. The same neighbors who had whispered behind their hands about the impropriety of their relationship now looked to them for leadership in this moment of crisis. As dusk approached, Clara and Samuel found a rare moment alone, standing on the porch of the Bradley home, while inside the final preparations continued. "I never imagined it would come to this," Clara admitted, watching as wagons loaded with supplies moved steadily toward the eastern boundary. "When I bought your freedom that day in the town square, I was just trying to save one man from injustice. Now we're trying to save an entire valley." Samuel's expression was contemplative as he surveyed the activity. "Perhaps same thing," he suggested. "Justice for one person connected to justice for all. Like watershed, many streams, one river." Clara smiled at the apt metaphor. "You've become quite the philosopher, Samuel Tallbear." "Had good teacher," he replied, his dark eyes warm as they met hers. "Fierce heart teaches fierce mind." Their moment of connection was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff McKenna, his expression grave as he approached the porch. "Just got word from a source in the territorial capital," he reported without preamble. "Western Extraction wasn't bluffing about the militia. Governor has authorized deployment of a territorial militia company to maintain order during the commencement of drilling operations." Clara felt her stomach tighten. Armed men against peaceful protesters. Technically, they're being sent to prevent violence and ensure compliance with territorial directives. McKenna clarified, his disgust evident. "But yes, armed men following Western Extraction's orders with the governor's blessing." "How many?" Samuel asked practically. 20, according to my source. Arriving by train tonight, then marching to the site by dawn." Clara exchanged a worried glance with Samuel. Their planned resistance had just become significantly more dangerous. "Do we tell everyone some might reconsider participating if they know armed militia will be involved?" "They should know the full risk," Samuel said firmly. "Each person decides for themselves what they are willing to face." McKenna nodded agreement. "I'll spread the word. People need to understand what they're walking into." He hesitated, then added reluctantly, "As sheriff, I'll have to acknowledge the militia's legal authority when they arrive. Can't officially oppose them without losing my badge." "We understand," Clara assured him. "You can serve the community better with your badge than without it." After McKenna departed, Clara and Samuel remained on the porch, the weight of the escalating situation settling around them like the gathering dusk. 20 armed men, Clara murmured, thinking through the implications. Western Extraction is determined to start drilling regardless of the cost. "Shows their fear," Samuel observed unexpectedly. "Fear they're the ones with guns and government backing." Samuel nodded. "Still fear. Would not need so many guns if not afraid of what we represent. Truth frightens them more than any weapon." His perspective shifted Clara's understanding of the confrontation ahead. Western Extraction wasn't displaying strength, by bringing armed militia. They were revealing their fundamental weakness. Their legal arguments, their economic promises, their political influence, none had succeeded in breaking community resistance. They were resorting to force because their other strategies had failed. "You're right," she said, drawing strength from the realization, "and that means we still have power even without weapons." The next few hours were spent ensuring everyone understood the heightened risks. As Samuel had predicted, some participants reconsidered their involvement when told about the militia, but the majority remained committed, their determination only strengthened by this evidence of Western extraction's ruthlessness. Plans were adjusted to account for the new threat. The most vulnerable elderly children, those with health concerns, would remain behind the front lines. Those prepared to risk arrest would form the primary blockade. Doc Bradley established a medical station safely removed from the potential confrontation area, but close enough to respond quickly if needed. As midnight approached, the first contingent of protesters departed for the eastern boundary, planning to establish position well before Western extraction's dawn arrival. Clara and Samuel rode with them, leading the wagons carrying supplies, and the initial resistance force of about 30 people. The eastern boundary of Clara's property had always been marked by the creek itself, a natural division that now took on profound significance. On the near bank stood what remained of Clara and Samuel's hopes for a peaceful future, the charred ruins of their partially constructed house, now surrounded by tents and wagons as the protest camp took shape. On the far bank lay the flat open ground where Western extraction planned to construct its first drilling platform, the most vulnerable point in the watershed, where the underground stream ran closest to the surface before feeding into the creek proper. Clara supervised the establishment of the camp with practical efficiency, ensuring warming fires were properly contained, food stations established, and clear pathways maintained between different areas. Samuel worked alongside the men constructing simple barriers across the shallow ford, where drilling equipment would likely attempt to cross, not solid enough to truly block heavy machinery, but substantial enough to create a clear line that could not be crossed without deliberate intent. Throughout the night, more supporters arrived, ranchers from outlying properties, families from town, even a few travelers who had heard about the confrontation and chosen to join the resistance. By dawn, nearly 100 people had gathered on Clara's side of the creek, their breath forming clouds in the cold morning air as they waited for Western extraction's arrival. Clara and Samuel stood at the forefront just behind the symbolic barrier at the ford. Behind them, the community had arranged itself in rough concentric circles, those willing to risk arrest in the front, supporters and witnesses forming the outer rings. Professor Harrington moved among them, camera in hand, documenting the peaceful gathering for potential legal proceedings later. The rising sun had just cleared the eastern hills when they heard the rumble of heavy wagons and the rhythmic tramp of many boots approaching from the east. Western extraction had arrived and the territorial militia with them. "Remember," Clara called out to those gathered behind her, "we are here peacefully. No violence, no weapons, no threats. Our bodies and our witness are our only tools." The approaching column came into view, presenting an intimidating spectacle. 4 large wagons loaded with drilling equipment led the way, followed by a contingent of uniformed militia, 20 men armed with rifles marching in formation. Behind them came Chambers Bentley and the other Western extraction executives, mounted on fine horses and looking grimly determined. The column halted at the creek's edge directly opposite the ford, where Clara and Samuel stood. A militia officer rode forward, unfurling an official-looking document. "By order of the territorial governor," he announced in a voice accustomed to command, "Western Extraction Company has been granted right of entry to this location for the purpose of accessing vital petroleum resources. All persons are hereby ordered to disperse and cease obstruction of lawful business activities. Clara stepped forward, her voice clear and steady despite the hammering of her heart. This is private property. I am Clara Whitford, the legal owner, and I have not granted permission for any drilling operations on my land. The officer's expression remained impassive. The territorial order supersedes private property rights in this instance, ma'am. Eminent domain has been invoked for resources deemed critical to territorial development. We dispute the legality of that order, Clara replied firmly, and we will not move aside while legal challenges proceed. If Western Extraction wishes to begin drilling, they will have to physically remove peaceful citizens from their path. The officer surveyed the assembled protesters, his professional assessment evident in his gaze. Ma'am, we have orders to ensure Western Extraction's access to the drilling site. I strongly urge you and your companions to disperse voluntarily. We are authorized to remove obstructions by force if necessary. Samuel stepped forward to stand beside Clara. Force against unarmed people, against women and elders. This brings honor to uniform. The officer had the grace to look uncomfortable, but his resolve didn't waver. My orders are clear, sir. Western Extraction will commence operations today as authorized by territorial authority. From behind the militia, Chambers urged his horse forward. Enough dialogue, Captain. These people have been warned. Proceed with clearing the ford. The captain hesitated, clearly reluctant to order force against such a diverse and peaceful gathering. His hesitation created an opening that Clara seized immediately. Before you act, Captain, she called out, you should know that Professor James Harrington of Columbia University is here documenting these proceedings. She gestured to where the professor stood with his camera. His evidence of any excessive force will be presented not only in territorial court, but to newspapers across the nation. Is Western Extraction prepared for that level of scrutiny? The calculated mention of national attention struck home. Chambers conferred hurriedly with his associates, their expressions suggesting this complication hadn't been anticipated. Captain, Chambers called finally, you have your orders. Clear minimal space for equipment passage only. No unnecessary force. The captain nodded grimly, then turned to his men. First squad advance. Remove barricades only. No engagement with protesters unless physically threatened. 6 militiamen splashed across the shallow ford, moving toward the simple barriers Clara and Samuel's people had constructed. As they approached the front line of protesters, Clara and Samuel among them sat down in unified peaceful resistance directly in the path of any equipment that might attempt to cross. The militiamen faltered, clearly unprepared for this tactic. Their orders covered removing physical barricades, not human beings, sitting peacefully on the ground. Move them, Chambers ordered impatiently from across the creek. The captain frowned. Sir, my men are not police officers. They're not trained in crowd control or civilian removal. Then send for the sheriff, Bentley suggested. He has the authority to arrest trespassers. They're not trespassing, the captain pointed out. According to Mrs. Whitford, this is her property, and Sheriff McKenna has made it clear he considers this a civil dispute, not a criminal matter. While this debate continued, more supporters arrived at the protest camp wagons from town, bringing additional supplies and participants. The community's resolve was visibly strengthening rather than weakening in the face of armed opposition. Chambers's frustration mounted visibly. This is absurd. We have legal authorization. Captain, if your men won't remove these obstructionists, Western Extraction will hire men who will. The threat hung in the air, its implications clear. Western Extraction was prepared to employ private force if the militia wouldn't act decisively. The standoff continued through the morning, a tense equilibrium establishing itself. The militia maintained position but took no further action to remove protesters. Western Extraction's executives conferred among themselves, occasionally sending messengers galloping toward town, presumably seeking additional legal leverage or enforcement. The protesters maintained their discipline, rotating shifts so that the front line remained consistently occupied, while allowing individuals to warm themselves by the fires, take nourishment, and rest briefly. Professor Harrington continued documenting everything, his camera capturing the peaceful resistance in stark contrast to the armed force arrayed against it. Near midday, a rider approached from the direction of town, Deputy Wilson, moving at a gallop that suggested urgent news. "Mrs. Whitford," he called, dismounting hastily. "Telegraph for you from Judge Harrison in Cheyenne." Clara rose from her position in the front line, accepting the yellow paper with hands that remained steady despite her racing heart. As she read the message, her expression transformed from tense anticipation to shock, then to carefully contained triumph. "Captain," she called out, crossing to the edge of the ford, "I believe this may alter your orders." The militia officer rode forward to meet her, accepting the telegram with evident curiosity. As he read, his eyebrows rose significantly. "Mr. Chambers," he called, turning his horse, "you should see this immediately." Chambers rode across the ford, his face darkening as he snatched the telegram and scanned its contents. "This is impossible," he sputtered. "The governor himself signed our authorization." "What does it say?" Samuel asked Clara quietly as she returned to the front line. "Judge Harrison convinced a federal judge to issue an emergency injunction," she explained, keeping her voice low. "All drilling operations are suspended, pending federal review of the environmental impact, and the territorial governor's use of eminent domain." Samuel's eyes gleamed with carefully restrained hope. "Federal court overrules territorial governor." "In matters of water protection, yes," Clara confirmed. "The Federal Waterways Protection Act of 1878 requires environmental assessment before any industrial activity that might impact navigable waterways. Our creek eventually flows into the North Platte River, which is federally protected." Across the ford, Western Extraction's executives had gathered in a tight cluster, examining the telegram and arguing heatedly. Finally, Chambers broke away, his face a mask of barely controlled fury, as he approached the captain. "This changes nothing," he insisted. "Our territorial authorization remains valid until formally revoked by the governor himself." The captain looked uncomfortable. "Sir, my orders specifically state that I am to enforce territorial directives except where superseded by federal authority. This appears to be such a case." "We'll see about that," Chambers snapped, wheeling his horse. "Bentley, ride for the telegraph office. Contact our associates in Cheyenne immediately. The rest of you maintain position. This delay is temporary at most." As Bentley galloped toward town, the tension at the ford diminished slightly. The militia withdrew to a less confrontational position, though they remained present. Western Extraction's equipment stayed in place, a visible reminder that the company had not abandoned its intentions. "What now?" Paul Garrett asked, joining Clara and Samuel at the front line. "Is it over?" "Far from it," Clara replied, keeping her voice realistic despite the minor victory. "The injunction buys us time, nothing more. Western Extraction will fight it with every legal and political resource at their disposal." "How much time?" Samuel asked practically. Clara considered. "Days, perhaps weeks. Federal court procedures move slowly, especially when powerful interests are trying to influence them." "So we maintain the blockade," Garrett concluded. "Keep people here, keep watching, keep Western Extraction from sneaking in despite the injunction." "Exactly," Clara agreed. "They've shown they're willing to use any means necessary to access the oil. We can't trust them to respect the injunction if they think they can get away with violating it. The news of the federal injunction spread quickly through the protest camp, creating a cautious optimism. The immediate threat of forced removal had been temporarily lifted, but no one doubted Western Extraction would continue its efforts through other channels. By mid-afternoon, Bentley returned from town, conferring briefly with Chambers before both men approached the Ford again. "Mrs. Whitford." Chambers called his tone carefully modulated to professional courtesy now. "We would like to propose a conversation, a negotiation, if you will. This confrontation benefits neither of us." Clara exchanged a glance with Samuel, whose slight nod confirmed her own instinct. "I'm willing to talk, Mr. Chambers, but not alone, and not without witnesses." "Of course," Chambers agreed smoothly. "Your associate is welcome to join us, as is Professor Harrington, whose scientific expertise might prove valuable in finding common ground." The implied concession, acknowledging Samuel as Clara's partner and recognizing Harrington's professional standing, suggested Western Extraction was indeed reconsidering its approach in light of the federal injunction. "Very well," Clara agreed. "We can meet at neutral ground, Sheriff McKenna's office in town, perhaps." "Acceptable?" Chambers nodded. "Shall we say 4 o'clock? That gives both sides time to confer with their supporters." As Western Extraction's representatives rode back across the ford, Samuel laid a cautioning hand on Clara's arm. "Be careful," he murmured. "Fox does not become friend of rabbit overnight." "I know," Clara assured him. "This is a tactical shift, not a change of heart. But if they're willing to negotiate rather than force their way in, we should hear what they have to say." The next hour was spent in careful preparation. Clara, Samuel, and Professor Harrington conferred about potential compromise positions and absolute boundaries. The protest camp was reorganized for sustained occupation with clearer schedules for rotation and resupply. No one believed Western Extraction had truly abandoned its drilling plans. At best, they were seeking a less confrontational path to the same goal. At the appointed hour, Clara, Samuel, and Professor Harrington rode into town, finding Sheriff McKenna waiting at his office with a pot of coffee and a carefully neutral expression. "They're already inside," he informed them quietly. "Chambers, Bentley, and someone new, a lawyer named Richardson, just arrived from Cheyenne. Supposed to be the governor's personal counsel." The introduction of this high-level representative confirmed the seriousness with which Western Extraction and its political allies were treating the situation. The federal injunction had clearly rattled them more than they had publicly admitted. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, but formally courteous. Chambers rose as Clara entered, offering a handshake that she accepted with equal formality. Samuel received a stiff nod, while Professor Harrington was greeted with professional respect by the new arrival, Richardson. "Professor," the lawyer acknowledged, "your reputation precedes you. The governor speaks highly of your testimony before the Territorial Resources Committee last year." "Indeed," Harrington replied dryly. "Curious, since my testimony explicitly warned against hasty resource extraction without proper environmental assessment advice, the governor seems to have disregarded in this instance." Richardson smiled thinly. "Politics often requires balancing competing interests, Professor. But that's precisely why we're here today, to find balance between Western Extraction's legitimate business interests and the community's concerns about water protection. A balance that has been notably absent from your approach thus far," Clara observed, taking her seat across from Chambers. "Threatening my property with eminent domain, attempting to intimidate peaceful protesters with armed militia, these are not the actions of a company seeking compromise. Perhaps there have been tactical errors on both sides," Chambers conceded with visible effort. "The situation has escalated beyond what anyone intended. That's why we're proposing a new approach." He nodded to Richardson, who opened a leather portfolio and extracted several documents. Western Extraction is prepared to modify its drilling plans significantly. The lawyer explained, passing copies across the table. Instead of drilling directly at the creek crossing, operations would be relocated 2 miles downstream, where the water table is considerably deeper and better protected by natural clay barriers. Professor Harrington examined the geological surveys with professional interest. This location does present somewhat reduced risk, he acknowledged cautiously, though any drilling through a water table carries inherent dangers. Additionally, Richardson continued, Western Extraction would establish a substantial environmental security bond, $500,000 held in escrow to be used for immediate remediation in the unlikely event of any contamination. And the company would commit to quarterly water quality testing by independent laboratories, Bentley added eagerly. Transparent reporting to both territorial authorities and local landowners. Clara studied the proposal carefully, aware of Samuel's silent presence beside her. The terms represented a significant retreat from Western Extraction's original position, a tacit acknowledgement that their political leverage had been weakened by the federal injunction and the community's unified resistance. "Why this sudden concern for water quality, Mr. Chambers?" she asked directly. "Yesterday, you were perfectly willing to drill at the most vulnerable point in our watershed, with no security bond and no testing provisions." Chambers met her gaze with calculated frankness. "Yesterday, Mrs. Whitford, we believed we had sufficient political and legal authority to proceed as planned. Today, we recognize that a more collaborative approach may be necessary." And in other words, Samuel translated bluntly, "Federal judge frightens you more than local ranchers." Richardson smiled tightly. "Let's say the federal injunction has created an opportunity for all parties to reconsider their positions and seek common ground." Clara exchanged a glance with Professor Harrington, whose slight shrug conveyed cautious professional assessment. The modified plan was indeed less immediately dangerous, though still far from ideal. "We would need time to review these proposals thoroughly," Clara said finally, "and to consult with the broader community. This isn't just my decision to make. The entire valley has a stake in protecting our shared watershed." "Of course," Richardson agreed smoothly, "though I should note that time is of some essence. The governor is preparing an appeal of the federal injunction based on territorial sovereignty principles. Should that appeal succeed, and our council believes it will, Western Extraction's original drilling authorization would be reinstated." The implicit threat was clear: negotiate now on somewhat improved terms, or face the original plan again when political leverage shifted back to Western Extraction. "We'll need at least 24 hours, Clara countered firmly. "Professor Harrington must analyze these geological surveys independently, and we must consult with representatives from throughout the valley, including the reservation." Chambers frowned at the mention of the reservation, but Richardson nodded agreement. 24 hours is reasonable. Shall we reconvene here tomorrow at the same time?" As they departed the sheriff's office, Samuel remained silent until they had mounted their horses and started back toward the protest camp. "They fear losing more than just time," he observed then. "Offer shows weakness, not strength." Clara nodded, having reached the same conclusion. The federal injunction must be stronger than they're admitting, and the community's unity has surprised them. They expected us to fragment under pressure. "So we continue resistance?" Samuel asked. "Or accept compromise?" "That's what we need to determine now," Clara replied thoughtfully. "The modified plan is clearly less immediately dangerous to the watershed. But can Western Extraction be trusted to adhere to its promises? And even with the deeper drilling location, is any amount of petroleum extraction worth risking our water supply?" These questions dominated the discussions that followed at the protest camp. Professor Harrington reviewed the geological surveys with meticulous care, confirming that the proposed alternative site did indeed present reduced immediate risk to the main water table, though not eliminating all concern. The clay barrier they reference is substantive, he explained to the gathered community leaders. It would provide some natural protection against immediate contamination. However, no barrier is perfect, especially when punctured by drilling equipment, and over time, petroleum can migrate through even dense clay. Paul Garrett voiced the pragmatic perspective. But it buys us time, doesn't it? Years, maybe decades before any contamination might reach the main water supply. That's generations of safety compared to their original plan. Potentially, yes, Harrington acknowledged, though I would caution against overconfidence. Geological predictions are never certain, especially when human intervention, drilling, pumping, waste disposal, introduces new variables. Clara listened to these discussions with growing clarity about her own position. When Samuel found her later that evening standing alone at the edge of the creek, where Western Extraction's equipment remained poised on the opposite bank, she had reached her decision. "You've chosen the path," he observed quietly, coming to stand beside her. Clara nodded, unsurprised by his perception. "I have, though I'm not sure it's the one everyone will support." "Tell me," Samuel requested simply. Clara gazed across the creek to where Western Extraction's drilling equipment stood silhouetted against the setting sun. "Their compromise still puts the watershed at risk. Reduced risk, yes, but risk nonetheless. Once drilling begins, once the precedent is established, there will be no stopping it. One well becomes 2, then 10, then hundreds across the valley." "You would reject offer completely?" Samuel asked, neither approving nor disapproving, simply seeking clarity. "Yes," Clara confirmed, "but with a counterproposal. We support the railroad's right-of-way through the eastern pastures as originally agreed. We even support careful regulated petroleum extraction for the railroad's specific operational needs, but only from sites safely distant from any water table using closed-system extraction methods that Professor Harrington assures me exist, though they're more expensive." Samuel considered this carefully. Western Extraction will resist. Closed systems cost more, reduce profit. "Exactly," Clara nodded. "They're not interested in supplying the railroad's needs, that's just their pretext. They want unrestricted access to pump as much oil as possible, as cheaply as possible, regardless of environmental impact. If we force them to use safer, more expensive methods, their profit margins shrink dramatically." "Clever strategy," Samuel acknowledged, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Use their own argument against them. If oil truly needed for railroad can still provide just safely at higher cost." "It puts the choice back on them," Clara explained. "Accept reasonable restrictions that protect the watershed, or reveal that their true priority is maximum profit, not railroad supply." Samuel nodded slowly, then asked the crucial question. "Community will support this position." Clara sighed, acknowledging the challenge ahead. "Some will. Others may prefer the compromise Western Extraction offered. It seems safer, more practical in the short term. And some would reject any drilling whatsoever, regardless of method or location." "So we must persuade," Samuel concluded. "Show why your path protects Valley best for longest time." "Yes," Clara agreed. "And we need to start tonight. Tomorrow's meeting with Western Extraction will be crucial. We need community consensus behind us before then." The hours that followed tested Clara's leadership as never before. In the fire-lit center of the protest camp, she presented her counterproposal to the assembled community representatives, ranchers and farmers, townspeople and reservation delegates. The debate was vigorous, sometimes heated with valid concerns raised from multiple perspectives. Some, like Paul Garrett, worried that rejecting Western extraction's compromise would lead to worse outcomes when the federal injunction eventually lifted. Others, particularly those from the reservation, argued that no amount of petroleum extraction could be considered safe when water supplies were at stake. Through it all, Clara listened more than she spoke, acknowledging every concern, integrating suggestions where possible, building toward consensus rather than imposing her vision. Samuel remained quietly supportive at her side, offering occasional insights from his unique perspective, bridging white and native worldviews. Near midnight, Professor Harrington made the intervention that finally tipped the balance. Having conducted additional analysis of the geological surveys, he addressed the gathering with academic precision. Western Extraction's proposed compromise location remains problematic for long-term watershed protection. He explained, using charcoal on birch bark to illustrate the underground structures. Their site still penetrates the secondary water table, which eventually feeds into the primary aquifer. Mrs. Whitford's counter-proposal, limiting extraction to sites above the geological shelf, east of Granite Ridge, provides natural protection that no human engineering can match. He turned to face the ranchers directly. "Gentlemen, I understand the appeal of immediate compromise, but as someone who has witnessed the aftermath of contamination in dozens of communities, I urge you to consider generational timescales. The decision you make tonight will affect your grandchildren's grandchildren." This appeal to legacy and long-term stewardship resonated deeply with the frontier community, where land was passed down through families, and where each generation saw itself as caretakers for the next. By the time the discussion concluded in the early hours of morning, a clear consensus had emerged in support of Clara's counter-proposal. When dawn broke over the eastern hills, the protest camp had transformed once again, no longer merely defensive, but purposefully united behind a positive vision for balanced development that protected the watershed while accommodating carefully regulated progress. Clara watched the sunrise with Samuel beside her, both exhausted yet energized by the community's renewed solidarity. "They may reject our terms entirely," she acknowledged. "Western Extraction wants unrestricted access, not carefully regulated extraction." "Let them reject," Samuel replied with quiet confidence. "Shows true face, then. Not about railroad needs, about greed only." Clara nodded, leaning against his solid strength. "Whatever happens today, we've already won something precious. Look around us." Samuel followed her gaze across the camp, where ranchers shared coffee with reservation representatives, where town merchants helped farmers repair equipment, where a community once divided by prejudice and suspicion now stood united in defense of their shared water and land. "Valley changed," Samuel observed. "People changed." "We changed them," Clara corrected gently, "by standing together, despite everything that should have kept us apart. By showing that some things like water, like truth, matter more than old divisions." The meeting with Western Extraction that afternoon was brief and decisive. Chambers listened to Clara's counter-proposal with barely concealed disdain, while Richardson's calculating eyes assessed the unified community delegation that accompanied her representatives from every segment of Valley society, including Chief Gray Fox himself. "This is entirely unacceptable," Chambers declared when Clara had finished presenting the terms. "The extraction methods you propose would increase operational costs by nearly 60%. No petroleum company could operate profitably under such restrictions. Yet these are precisely the methods used in regions where water protection is legally mandated," Professor Harrington pointed out. "Companies operate profitably, just with reduced margins." "Reduced to the point of infeasibility in this case," Bentley insisted. "The geological challenges specific to this region would require specialized equipment, additional personnel. All of which Western Extraction can well afford, Clara interrupted firmly. Your company reported profits of $12 million last year according to financial disclosures. Slightly reduced margins in one operation hardly constitute hardship. Richardson intervened smoothly, recognizing the deteriorating dynamic. Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle. Mrs. Whitford, what if Western Extraction were to increase the environmental security bond to $1 million? Double the water testing frequency, these concessions would provide additional protection while allowing standard extraction methods. Money cannot replace water once poisoned, Chief Gray Fox stated, speaking for the first time in the negotiation. No bond, no amount of testing changes this truth. Samuel nodded agreement. Not about money, about method. Safe methods exist. Choose to use them or choose to leave.
Now sheets bonds on she turns it.
The simplicity of this binary choice extract safely or not at all stripped away the layers of legal and financial complexity Western Extraction had used to obscure the fundamental issue. Chambers's face darkened with barely controlled anger. This is extortion, he snapped. You're attempting to dictate terms to a legally authorized business operation. No, Mr. Chambers, Clara corrected calmly. We're establishing the conditions under which our community will accept petroleum extraction within our watershed. Conditions based on scientific evidence, generational thinking, and the fundamental right to clean water. She gestured to the unified delegation behind her. Every segment of this valley, ranchers, farmers, merchants, the reservation stands together on this. We welcome responsible development that respects our water. We reject exploitation that threatens it. Richardson leaned close to Chambers, murmuring something that caused the executive to frown deeply, before nodding reluctant agreement. We will need to consult with our board of directors, Richardson announced, gathering his papers. These terms represent a significant departure from standard industry practices. A decision of this magnitude cannot be made in the field. Clara recognized the tactical retreat for what it was, neither acceptance nor rejection, but a deferral intended to buy time while Western Extraction explored other avenues of leverage. How long will this consultation require? She asked directly. At least a week, Richardson replied, possibly longer given the financial implications. During which time the protest camp remains in place, Clara stated rather than asked, and no drilling equipment moves onto my property under any circumstances. Agreed, Richardson conceded, recognizing the non-negotiable nature of this condition. Western Extraction will maintain its current position, but take no further steps until negotiations conclude. As the meeting disbanded, Sheriff McKenna approached Clara and Samuel with a mixture of admiration and concern. That was well handled, he acknowledged. But don't underestimate them. They'll be working every angle during this consultation period. Political pressure in Cheyenne, legal challenges to the federal injunction, maybe even attempts to divide the community again. We know, Clara assured him. That's why the camp stays active, the witnesses remain present, and the community stays united. We've learned not to trust Western Extraction's promises. Good, McKenna nodded approval, because this isn't over. Not by a long shot. The prediction proved accurate. Over the days that followed, Western Extraction pursued multiple strategies to undermine the community's unified stance. Telegrams arrived from the territorial capital, suggesting that continued resistance might result in reduced government services or delayed infrastructure projects. Individual ranchers received private offers of advance royalties significantly larger than those initially proposed. Rumors circulated about potential legal liability for protest participants if drilling was ultimately approved. Through it all, the community maintained its solidarity, reinforced by daily gatherings at the protest camp, where information was shared openly, rumors dispelled, and mutual support reaffirmed. Clara and Samuel moved constantly between town and camp, addressing concerns, resolving conflicts, and maintaining the fragile unity that remained their strongest defense. 1 week stretched into 2, with no formal response from Western Extraction's board of directors. The delay itself became a form of pressure testing the community's endurance, their willingness to maintain the protest camp through increasingly cold autumn weather, their ability to continue normal lives while sustaining constant vigilance. Then, on a crisp morning, when the first snow dusted the distant mountains, a telegram arrived for Clara from Judge Harrison in Cheyenne. Federal injunction made permanent stop. Territorial eminent domain. Claim rejected. Stop. Drilling requires landowner permission and federal environmental assessment. Stop. Congratulations. Stop. Harrison. The news spread through the valley like wildfire, transforming tension into jubilation. The federal court had ruled decisively that the territorial governor had exceeded his authority in attempting to override private property rights for commercial petroleum extraction. More importantly, the ruling established that any future drilling in the watershed would require both landowner consent and federal environmental review, precisely the protections Clara had sought from the beginning. By mid-afternoon, Western Extraction's response became visible. Without formal announcement or acknowledgement of defeat, the company's wagons and equipment began withdrawing from their position across the creek. The territorial militia, no longer needed to enforce now invalidated orders, departed soon after. By sunset, the eastern boundary stood clear again, the immediate threat lifted. The celebration at the protest camp that night was unlike anything Dry Creek Valley had ever witnessed, a convergence of cultures and communities that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Ranchers and reservation members shared food and stories around common fires. Town merchants and outlying farmers toasted each other with coffee and occasional stronger spirits. Children darted between groups, absorbing a lesson in unity and persistence that would shape their understanding of community for generations to come. Amidst the celebration, Clara and Samuel found a quiet moment alone, standing on the rise where their house had begun to take shape, before the fire looking out over the valley now secured against environmental exploitation. "We won," Clara said softly, still hardly believing it. "Not just a delay or a compromise, but a genuine victory." Samuel nodded his arm around her shoulders as they surveyed the celebration below. "One more than water protection," he observed. "One new understanding between people. New community." Clara leaned into his strength, recognizing the truth in his words. The battle against Western Extraction had transformed Dry Creek Valley in ways that transcended the immediate issue of petroleum drilling. Old prejudices had been challenged, mutual respect, established shared values, discovered beneath superficial differences. "What do we build now?" she asked, gesturing toward the charred remnants of their original construction. "The house we planned seems almost inadequate after everything that's happened." Samuel considered this thoughtfully. "Not just house for two people now," he agreed. "Need place for community to gather to remember what achieved together." "A meeting hall," Clara suggested, the vision taking shape in her mind. "On our land, but open to all ranchers, townspeople, reservation members. A place where the valley can continue coming together, not just in crisis, but in celebration and cooperation." "And house, too," Samuel added with a small smile. "Still need home for us." Clara turned to face him fully, the firelight casting his strong features in warm relief. "Yes," she agreed softly. "A home for us. For our future." In his dark eyes, he saw the same vision that filled her heart, not just rebuilding what had been lost, but creating something new and stronger. A home that honored both their traditions while making space for something uniquely their own. A partnership that bridged worlds while creating a new one. As the celebration continued below, Clara and Samuel sealed their commitment with a kiss that promised not just personal happiness, but a shared dedication to the community they had helped transform. The guardian of the valley had fulfilled its purpose, protecting not just water and land, but the fragile bonds of understanding between diverse peoples united by common cause. The future stretched before them, as vast and promising as the western sky above, filled with challenges yet to face, but now faced together. Clara and Samuel White, and native individual and community past and future, merging into a present, built on courage, perseverance, and the fierce heart that had recognized from that first moment in a dusty town square, a man worth saving and a love worth fighting for.